We're going to have basically start off with a quick overview of some key ideas. Then we're going to have 4 key modules. And we'll cover, I think we're scheduled for 4 class sessions, roughly 1 class session for each module. My 3rd section on social awareness, that might be a little long, so we might end up adding a 5th session. Depends on how that shapes up. And as the overview, we'll talk about self-awareness, which is sort of a foundational skill to emotional intelligence, then self-regulation. 3rd section will be on social awareness. And then the 4th one is relationship skills, but managing relationships in a very advanced way by being very emotionally informed of both the context and the people that you're interacting with. So that's an advanced skill, can be very, very, very useful both in personal and professional settings. So let's go ahead and start with the overview. And let me explain what is emotional intelligence. Let me define that first. And then I'll talk about the 4 components of emotional intelligence and how they interrelate. So I found this great definition of emotional intelligence on Wikipedia. I don't always agree with Wikipedia, but in this case I do. And it's a really good definition. Lots of little subtleties here that I want to point out. So emotional intelligence is the capability of individuals to recognize their own emotions and those of others, discern between different feelings, and label them correctly or appropriately, use emotional information to guide thinking and behavior, and manage and or adjust emotions to adapt to environments or achieving one's goals. Okay? So let me give you my take on this definition. So the first part of emotional intelligence is to recognize your own emotions, okay? And then the emotions of others. If you don't recognize your own emotions, it's very hard to recognize the emotions in others. Okay? And then you want to be able to discern between different feelings. What's the difference between irritated versus frustrated, angry versus livid? All these different feeling type words, many of them are in the same category of feelings, but they have subtle differences. And so someone who's very advanced emotionally can notice the visceral difference between those subtle between those terms and apply the correct term to the appropriate feeling. Okay? So that labeling is very important. And when you're able to recognize and correctly identify and label specific feelings in yourself and in others, this gives you emotional information that you can then use to achieve your goals. Okay, that's basically it. The big insight here really is having access to more relevant information to achieve your goals. In this case, emotional-based information in both yourself and others. Okay, so that's the piece that I think, from a very practical standpoint, that makes your judgment and your executive decision making much better. Is you just have more data. When you have more data to work with, you're able to make a more well-informed decision. And when you make a more well-informed decision, you tend to make better decisions. Okay, that's the gist of it. And this is where you get sort of the return on investment, if you would, to use sort of finance terminology on developing your emotional intelligence. Better data, better decisions, better outcomes, better chances of achieving your goals. All right. Okay, so let's talk about some commonly used terms. You'll hear the word emotional intelligence used quite a bit. You'll hear emotional quotient. You'll hear emotional intelligence quotient. And a lot of this work started with trying to draw a parallel between intellectual intelligence, like IQ. I'm using sort of the same idea, but apply to emotional competence. So those who sort of, as this particular topic got very popular in mainstream society, that sort of adopted that term and tried to make it analogous to intellectual intelligence. So for our purposes, these are all very interchangeable terms. At least that's how they're used, sort of in the media and in the literature. And so emotional intelligence, emotional quotient, emotional intelligence quotient, it's really the same thing, okay? It's emotional intelligence. And for shorthand for this class, I'm going to refer to it as EQ, okay? Emotional intelligence. It's your ability to be smart with emotions. That's basically what the skill set is. Now, there are 4 key components to having a very high emotional intelligence, or EQ. And here are the 4, which matches the 4 modules we have, coincidentally, or not so coincidentally. Self-awareness is really about recognizing your own feelings. Okay, this is sort of your foundation for emotional intelligence. It forms the foundation for a lot of the more advanced emotional intelligence skills. So, what emotional self-awareness means is the ability to acknowledge, notice, and acknowledge and correctly identify the feeling that you're in the process of experiencing. Okay, that's the gist of it. And when you have self-awareness, this gives you the ability to self-regulate your emotions and feelings. Okay? So first, it's the awareness of the feelings you're experiencing, and then it's self-regulation of the emotions you're expressing to others. Okay? So self-regulation is about choosing your words and your actions across a wide range of emotions that you might experience and a wide range of intensities you might be experiencing. And really, it's the ability to respond in a considered way rather than reacting impulsively. Once you have self-regulation, you can have social awareness, or what I call awareness of other people's feelings. And when social awareness is really to the ability to notice and identify specific feelings others are having or had, particularly if they're recounting an old experience, or are currently in the process of experiencing. So when someone says, when I was a child, my dog died, you can correct, if you're adept, you can say, oh, that sounds like you must have been very sad, right? And you can look at the person's facial expressions, you listen to their tone of voice, and you get some sense if they're sad or not. And you can see if it's more of a historical feeling or if they still feel sad about something that happened many years ago. Okay? So that social awareness becomes very useful. Again, that is built on a foundation of self-awareness. When you understand yourself, it makes it easier to understand others. Okay? And then the final skill is emotionally informed relationship skills. So being in relationship with coworkers, colleagues, your boss's boss, with clients, with subordinates, and with vendors, and having the ability to ascertain the emotional context of your interactions with those people, and to be able to emotionally read where other people are emotionally, right? So you're more informed about the state of these relationships, and it gives you information that can be applied to basically better choices. So if, for example, I remember a long time ago, I was talking to a vendor that I worked with quite a bit, and one day we're talking, and the vendor seemed very upset, and it seemed like it was unusual because there was nothing that I was aware of that would be related to a vendor feeling upset, So I wasn't sure if it was, they're having a bad day personally, right? And it's sort of leaking over into their professional work. I wasn't sure if, I did something wrong, or if one of my team members did something wrong, or if there was some kind of, snafu or problem in the payment process and they weren't being paid on time. I don't know, right? But what I did notice was they seemed upset. So I was able to inquire to figure out what's going on, and then to sort of rectify anything I could rectify and sort of help protect that relationship. Because I had an insight that doesn't seem right. They shouldn't be upset. There's something that's I'm aware of, so there must be something else going on. I need more information, right? So a lot of this is recognizing when you get some emotional insight on the context of the situation or the people you're interacting with, and to recognize you need to go obtain more information. Okay? And that just makes your relationships better and stronger. People trust that if there's a problem that you'll be responsive, and it builds long-term better relationships both personally and professionally. Okay, and we talked about this for a second. So consider other people's feelings as you're making decisions that impact them. Okay, so those are the 4 components of emotional intelligence, and the focus for our course today will be making these EQ, quote-unquote soft skills really easily understood and accessible to people who perhaps might be more accustomed to hard skills, right? Like math, engineering, sciences, the case interview, and the like. And the second goal for my course today, or this course overall over multiple days, is to take these high-level EQ skills and simplify them into a set of very concrete actions and behaviors and habits that you can start using immediately. There is quite a bit of literature out there on emotional intelligence. There's quite a bit of research in terms of soft skills and whether they are correlated or not to further career progression, which they are. There isn't a lot of information out there on what do you do tomorrow differently, right? So Monday morning, at 9 a.m., I'm in a meeting. What do I do differently in the meeting that I didn't do last Friday, right? So my focus is on that sort of concreteness. That will probably be mostly in modules 2, 3, and 4. So today is a little bit more conceptual and foundational with a couple things, exercises you can do to improve your self-awareness. So I would ask you to bear with me. The more action-oriented sort of progresses as we go. But I want to make sure that there's a foundational understanding of the components of EQ and self-awareness before we start doing that. So we will get to that. That's my commitment to you. But we will build a layer up on our foundation first. All right. So let's shift gears, talk about Module 1. self-awareness, which is the foundation for emotional intelligence and all the emotional intelligence skills, processes, and habits. So self-awareness, let's talk about how emotional self-awareness benefits your career. There are a couple key things that's useful to keep in mind. And, why would you bother working on self-awareness? The first is, and this is a very big one because I see a lot of people make this mistake, is when you have greater emotional self-awareness, you're able to better ascertain the emotional costs and benefits of every career decision you make. Right? So to use financial terms, you can make more quote-unquote profitable career decisions, meaning good decisions, when you can accurately price the cost and the benefits of every decision that you make and the impact it has on you emotionally. So I see a lot of people who write to me saying that they've made this particular career choice and they're miserable. Right? And what they've done, essentially from a decision-making process standpoint, is they made a decision based on prestige, finances, future career opportunities, and progression. But they forgot to assess the emotional impact of that particular choice, and they end up in a decision that doesn't work for them. So when you have greater self-awareness, you can prevent those situations from happening, and you can also get out of situations that don't work for you emotionally more quickly. And I see very many people, even people 10, 20 years into the career, who do this. And it becomes very expensive to switch careers later because you're so well established. So that's sort of one major benefit that I see, particularly for high achieving, driven, well-educated type of white-collar professionals. The second is when you have greater self-awareness, it provides a foundation for social awareness. You're better able to ascertain other people's reactions to the ideas you present, your proposals, resolving conflicts, and building these trusted advisor type relationships with key employees, key clients, and people that you work with. It also provides the foundation, again, for developing advanced relationship skills because you get better input from other people. You're able to notice their emotions by noticing your own, and you build better relationships with people in your professional network, with senior executives, clients, and coworkers. So those are the three big benefits for self-awareness in terms of your career. And then on the personal life, similarly, you make better decisions, right? When you can ascertain and really recognize the cost, the emotional cost and the emotional benefit of all your choices in life, you make a better informed decision that benefits you more. And so that's a huge benefit from a personal life standpoint. And the second major benefit personally is you get a better sense of what kinds of people work better for you, right, from an emotional standpoint. And it improves your ability to select who you want in your life and who you do not. And it also helps build you a better emotional support network, people who are emotionally supportive. And that's extremely important empirically speaking. There's a lot of research on this. It is very vital to have those kinds of relationships to weather adversities in your personal life as well as in your career. Finally, the last 2 points I want to mention on this, and then we'll move on, is when you have greater self-awareness, you can identify what do you want and what do you need from your personal life, from specific relationships. And when you know what you want and need, you can set better goals for your life, for specific relationships, and you have more information to incorporate in setting direction and strategy for yourself as well as for certain relationships. A surprisingly high number of people that read my work and follow my work don't fully appreciate what they want and need. They are oftentimes very influenced by what everyone else thinks they should want and thinks they should need. And so having that information come from within, you get better decisions. And basically, it's a happier, more successful life with success defined very holistically. And finally, better conflict resolution skills. When you know yourself really well, you can find solutions to improve relationships so that you get more out of it. And you can also improve relationships in a way that your partner or your other person in the relationship benefits too. So it helps you build more win-win type of relationships when you have that information available to you in your judgment. So that's sort of the key points here around why emotional self-awareness benefits you both professionally and personally. Many, many parts to self-awareness. These are the 8 key topics I'll be talking about. Feeling and identifying your feelings, or experiencing and identifying your feelings. We'll talk about intensity ranges, making more informed decisions, using self-awareness as a way of recognizing other people's feelings. We'll talk about emotional intensity, as well as sort of a system for gauging how aware are you. One of the requests I got in the pre-work up to this course was quite appropriately, I think, given my students and what I've taught them, is how do you measure self-awareness, right? And how do you measure emotional intelligence? They wanted a numerical score, right? Like ABCD, 100%, 92%, 68.2%. Emotions don't quantify very well. So I've made an attempt to try to quasi-quantify some of these emotional intelligence skills as a way for you to measure your own progress. So you can assess where you are now, and then where you are a month from now, half a year from now, so on and so forth. And then we'll talk about where self-awareness comes from more organically, and also how to improve your own self-awareness by yourself. So let's talk about feeling and identifying your feelings. Okay? So we're experiencing and identifying your feelings. So I want to talk about the feelings, what I call the feelings self-awareness test. So I have a question to ask you. And my question is, how do you feel right now? Like this second, how do you feel? Okay? And I'll tell you what, most people, here's what they say. They say, I feel good, I feel fine, I'm okay, right? So that's a very common experience. And the problem with that is they are not feelings. These are what I call pseudo-feelings, right? There's this great feelings wheel developed by Gloria Wilcox, which I really love. And it is sort of a kind of a multiple choice list of possible feelings you might be experiencing right now, okay? So in the center, we have the core 6 feelings. I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm scared, I'm joyful, I'm powerful, I'm peaceful, right? And then there are nuances in the second circle. If I feel sad, I might feel, lonely, I might feel ashamed or really guilty. If I'm mad, I might feel critical, I might feel angry or hostile. So these are all nuances of emotions. And the last circle, the last ring in the circle, rather, on the most outer edge, are yet more subtle references to feelings. So if I'm mad, I might feel hurt. If I feel hurt, I might feel distant. Okay? Again, these are all subtle distinctions. And someone with a very high EQ will be able to tell you, I'm feeling one of the feelings on this wheel, right? And noticing what is the difference between being anxious versus insecure, right? Those are slightly different feelings. Or what's the difference between feeling cheerful versus amused? Those are positive feelings, but they're slightly different, right? So this is a very useful tool, and I'll refer to this quite a bit. And the main point I want to make today is that feeling good or feeling fine or feeling okay. Like, how are you today? I feel good. I feel fine. I feel okay, right? Those aren't really feelings. They're not on the feelings wheel. It's not one of the 6 major categories, as an example. So pseudo-feelings really are what I describe as just socially acceptable responses to when someone says, hey, how are you doing? That don't really say anything and don't really convey your sense of emotional, your emotional state at the moment. And it's so funny. I remember I had this engagement manager at McKinsey who was German, and he came to the U.S. for the first time to work in the New York office where I was working, and he was essentially my boss on a project. And so it was his job to teach me how to be McKinsey, right? Teach me all the McKinsey skills, the consultant skills and whatnot. And he asked me if I would coach him on being an American and how to work with American clients. And so he went out to the Midwest and actually no, it was in New York first. And said, I asked somebody, how are you doing? Or someone asked me how I'm doing. And he started explaining, well, my ankle's a little sore. I had a little bit of a cold yesterday. And he took the question literally, how are you feeling today? And he actually answered the question. And then they looked at him really weird, right? So in U.S. culture, U.S. business culture, when someone asks you, how are you? There's only one standard answer, which is socially acceptable, which is, good, fine, okay, right? And that's not a real genuine emotional exchange. So it's what you do in work, arguably, or I should say it's what's most common in the workplace, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, we can debate. It's not something you want to do personally, particularly if you want to be more emotionally connected to the people around you. So I'll give you an example. I was with a friend And I asked, how are you today? Right? Sort of a very standard greeting. And my friend said, I'm fine, and which is, again, is a pseudo feeling, not a real feeling. And so I asked, are you actually fine, or are you just saying that to be polite? Because she had a very, she had a facial reaction that seemed very negative in terms of her feeling state as being expressed on her face, but her words were neutral to positive, right? So that's a disconnect. We'll talk about that a lot. When you notice a difference between what people are feeling versus what they are experiencing and saying, when there's a disconnect and they're not congruent, that means there's some new piece of information that you want to try to obtain, okay? So if you say, hey, how do you like my proposal? And someone says, oh, it seems fine, but their face looks like, in the middle of in the middle of surgery because it's so painful, right? Then there's some information they probably are experiencing that you don't know about that they have not expressed verbally. So that's an example. So this is an example in a personal situation. I say, how are you doing? My friend says, fine. She does not look fine at all. And then I inquire and I check in and say, are you actually fine, or are you just saying that, right? And her comment was, most people who ask, don't really want to know how I'm feeling, right? Which was my German colleague at McKinsey, his conclusion as well, is when Americans ask how you're feeling, they don't really want to know. I'm like, yeah, it's true. And I said, well, actually, I do want to know how you're feeling. That's why I asked. And then she sort of admitted that she's feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, and angry. And then we had, these are real feelings on the feeling wheel, right? And then I asked, what's going on? Tell me about it. Right, so that was an actual exchange. This happened maybe like 2 months ago or so. So here's the key takeaway. Someone with a very high EQ can recognize when they're experiencing a certain feeling, and they can identify the real feeling correctly by name. So if you are feeling resentful, you recognize you're feeling resentful as opposed to rageful, right? If you are joyful, you can recognize you're feeling joyful as opposed to excited, because it's a slightly different feeling. And someone with very high EQ can express the feeling with the correct name and label to somebody else, right? So with my friend, just said, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Okay, overwhelmed is a very specific feeling. She could verbalize that. I'm feeling, I forget what it was it disappointed or the other two or three other negative feelings? She could name all of them, right? So she had that awareness. And that's super important because a lot of people will have strong negative feelings, but may not always be able to identify the specific feeling. And then what ends up happening is it's a lot of negative emotional energy that really isn't able to be expressed verbally, so it gets expressed in other ways. So, for example, one of the things that occurs in U.S. sort of social culture is around what it is to be a man, right? And to be an American man, there's sort of one socially acceptable feeling, at least historically, that American men are allowed to feel, which is anger. They can be mad, but they can't be sad, they can't be disappointed, right? They can't feel hurt, they can't feel ashamed. They can only feel mad, right? So one of the challenges with the young boys raised in this culture today, and also many men, is they feel the full range of feelings, but they don't know how to identify it. They don't know how to express it verbally, so they just act angry, right? They're aggressive. They can be violent, right? Either with their words or physical actions. So one of the ways of developing higher emotional intelligence and skills is to correctly label the feelings, okay? So that's the idea behind feeling your feelings and identifying your feelings correctly by name. So what I want to talk about now is the second skill of self-awareness, which is being able to correctly identify how intense a feeling that you're experiencing at this particular point in time. Right? So let's talk about that. Okay? Feelings intensity range, right? So high EQ people have felt a variety of feelings across a wide range of intensities. So for our purposes, this is my effort to quantify something that most people don't quantify. I'm going to sort of develop my own emotional intensity scale. And if you're feeling a particular emotion at level 0, that means you're not feeling any of that emotion. If you're feeling at a level 10, you're overwhelmed by the emotion. So if I am feeling angry, right, really angry, I'm a level 5. If I am consumed with rage, right, that's an overwhelming level of anger. That's a level 10. And if I feel absolutely no anger whatsoever right now, that's a level 0. Okay? So that's our scale. And one thing that's important to realize is The 5 number, which is the middle of the range, is actually a high level of intensity, not medium. That's very intentional. So I'll make sure to explain why in a little bit. And 10 is overwhelming, okay? So that's an intentional way of calibrating the scale, and you'll see why in a moment, but I want to point that out, okay? So let me give you some examples of what is a level 1 through 10 type of feeling. So let's talk about sadness, right? The other day I forgot my wallet at my house. I drove off. I had to come back. I was sad. I was disappointed, right? That's like a level 1, like a mild level. This is so disappointing, right? A level 3 is your best friend moves to another country and you're really disappointed by that. You're feeling very sad. A level 5 level of sadness would be, I got fired from my job. I got laid off. I'm so sad and am depressed about it. Level 7 might be like your spouse is divorcing you, so in the range of overwhelming. Level 10 might be my parents died, or someone's parents died when they were 8 years old, and they're completely catastrophically overwhelmed with sadness and grief and depression, right? So that's a very high level of intensity. So again, none is 0, high is 5, and overwhelming is a level 10. So what I want to do now is share with you some common emotional intensity patterns so you're familiar with them, and so that you can potentially recognize these patterns both in yourself and in others. This helps give you sort of a lot of foundational awareness of how different kinds of people process their emotions. So someone who is high EQ has a very certain pattern of how often they experience different levels of negative emotions at different intensity levels. So for someone who's high EQ, most of the time they're not feeling a lot of negative emotions, right? So right now I'm teaching, I'm having a lot of fun, I'm enjoying this. I'm not really angry, I'm not mad, I'm not vengeful, I'm not irritated, I'm not frustrated, I'm, sort of like engaged would be a good feeling for me right now. It's a positive feeling. I'm happy because I like teaching and I like teaching this particular topic, so I'm feeling some level of joy. So no real negative emotions right now for me, okay? So for me, negative emotions are level 0 a quite high percentage of the time, okay? And so it's very common in a lot of different people, and this particular pattern is common in high EQ people. So what you'll see is that the higher level emotions, as you go up in intensity, the frequency of occurrence goes down, okay? So low emotions occur much more frequently than high intensity emotions, and you see sort of like this sort of natural curve that degrades over time. So it's a very typical, high EQ pattern, around emotional intensity. So for example, you might have this pattern around anger. Most of the time I'm not angry. Most of the time I'm not sad. When I am angry, I'm like mostly irritated, right? Like level 1 irritated. Like, I forgot my wallet. I'm going to lose 2 minutes on my day because I just drove away from my house. I got to make a U-turn and come back, right? And that's my level of anger for that day or for that morning. I don't usually feel sad all that often, but sometimes I get bad news. I've gotten some bad news about my family recently, and I felt sadness, right? And fairly high degree of sadness. But bad news from my family doesn't come that often. Once every couple of years, I get some really bad news, right? Such as a death in the family or someone who's in the process of dying. Most of the time, I don't feel sad, right? When I do feel sad, it's level 1, level 2, level 3, and then occasionally level 4 and 5, and then like once in a blue moon, 7, 8, or 9, something along those lines, okay? So that's a very typical pattern I want you to remember because it'll be a useful reference point for understanding other patterns. So this is sort of our reference one of kind of what we're striving for, both in ourselves and, frankly, in others. Right? When you have a boss, for example, that has this level of emotional experience pattern, that's beneficial. Okay, it's good. If you have a family member or a spouse that has this emotional pattern, it makes life a lot less chaotic, I'll tell you that. Here's a different pattern, and let's look at the chart first of all, then I'll explain what I mean by it. So this is what I call a high-low extreme pattern. So someone with this pattern basically has very low intensity and very high, like extremely high, but nothing really in the middle, okay? So it's only the highs and the lows. So for example, someone with like anger management, some people, that's been a popular term here in the U.S., maybe the last 10, 15 years. someone with, who gets very angry very abruptly, what usually happens is they have a very low level of anger, which is like, almost none. And then suddenly they go to overwhelming levels of anger, like in 2 seconds, right? And there isn't a buildup, right? So healthy anger, for example, or productive anger is before you get to a level 10 and you express a level 10 level of anger to people around you, you first experience level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And others can get the benefit that of recognizing that you're feeling angry and that your anger intensity is slowly escalating because of the conflict between you and the other person. Okay, someone with very abrupt anger patterns will not do that. They won't say I'm a little irritated to mildly to moderately to I'm getting really kind of angry right now to overwhelming, emotionally violent type of reaction. Okay, this makes life very difficult. If this is your boss, what you end up finding out is you never know what's going to happen because your boss is unpredictable. 1 minute they're fine, and the next minute they're yelling verbal obscenities at you for making a mistake or something like that. Right? This makes life very, very, very difficult. If this is, a spouse, it makes a marriage very, very intense and chaotic because it's very unpredictable, very volatile. Okay? So, and as a reference point, so you want to look out for whether you see this pattern in yourself. You want to look out and see if you see this pattern in, say, your parents. You want to see it in your siblings, spouse, or significant other. You want to see if it's in your boss. You want to see if it's in your direct reports. You want to see if it's in your CEO, right? If you have a CEO that does this, it ends up happening as people who are very skilled with high IQ and high EQ and have a high market value in terms of their skill set. They don't like working for someone who has this sort of emotional pattern because it's very chaotic, and they leave. So for example, I have someone who's close to me who was working for a company where this was the CEO's emotional experience pattern. And it was crazy because no one knew when the CEO was going to blow up. And so all the good people with other options left. They quit the company, very, very high turnover rate. And all the people who stayed were those who had very poor market skills and really couldn't get a better job somewhere else, and they decided to stay. Okay? So it has lots of impact and implications for corporate performance, your own job satisfaction, and then satisfaction with relationships in your personal life. All those factors matter. Now, just for context, there's a reason why some people will have this pattern. If someone is experiencing a lot of very intense emotions, sort of above the level 5, and it's very frequent and very intense, usually there's some level of emotional trauma, earlier in someone's life. Whether usually childhood oriented, somewhere between under the ages of 15, that kind of a thing. So just for your context, if someone has that, those are hard. It's very difficult to change with just the kinds of exercises I'll be talking about. That's really more appropriate for working with a professional therapist, and that's specializes in trauma work, as an example. So I'll share with you lots of exercises. Those tend to be more useful for managing your emotions sort of in levels 0 through 6 or so. As you get into the overwhelming level, there's more trauma-based reasons for that, as opposed to lack of exposure and lack of a role model. And those factors really, professional therapy tends to be sort of a more appropriate tool to address those kinds of situations. Okay. Here is a third pattern I want to share. This is someone who doesn't experience intensity at all across any feeling. So for someone who is angry, for example, they experience a level 0 of anger, which is no anger, pretty much 100% of the time. Okay. So this is someone who really is emotionally unable to feel, and we'd argue would be repressed. All right, so this pattern is someone who doesn't feel much. They're shut down. You might hear words like emotionally repressed or unable to feel, shut down. Sort of those are the various synonyms that would describe this particular pattern. And honestly, there were certain parts of my life where I was like this, super shut down for a certain number of years. And I remember my brother would say, what happened those years, right? And he noticed them, and they wonder what happened to me. And I was very shut down. Right? So that's one pattern also. The interesting thing about this pattern, and we'll see this in a second, is, it's hard to shut down and repress just negative emotions, right? I don't really want to feel upset. Let me not feel upset. When you shut down negative emotions, things work in pairs, right? If you shut down negative emotions, you also shut down positive emotions. So we'll talk more about that in a second. So you'll see that these three patterns repeat a lot, and they'll repeat also in positive emotions. So for example, if you see someone who has very positive feelings, such as joy, right? A lot of times they may not feel a whole bunch of joy day to day, but they have a moderate level of joy intensity a frequent amount of the time, right? But they often don't have like overwhelming levels of joy, right? So overwhelming levels of joy might be, won the lottery. I remember when my first daughter was born, I was so excited, and there's like excited, and then there's really excited, right? So there's many times where I felt joy, but that level of like just like lifetime memory level of joy, for example, that doesn't happen that often for me, and I think for a lot of folks. You'll see some people with sort of overwhelming joy, which might seem like a very odd phrase, maybe a good thing, would be someone who is perhaps bipolar or manic. So I have a good friend who is bipolar, and I can see when his bipolar and his mania is really kicking in, like his level of joy and excitement is just off the charts, right? And then probably like a level 8, 9, 10, something along those lines. So that gives you some idea of how the spectrum of joy works. The high-low pattern we talked about earlier, same thing. Someone who is, and this describes my friend actually, is no joy and like overwhelming levels of joy, right? There's like an on-off switch. Some days he's off, no joy. Other days he's on, and the joy is like he won the lottery, right? Every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. It's a really interesting pattern, and so not a lot in the middle, right? And generally better emotional functioning, there's gradations. It's not black and white. There's a lot of shades of gray in the middle. So it's not all or none. It's every little step in between, right? So for me, for example, I had this pattern of unable to feel positive emotions. So there were certain periods of my life where I felt no joy, like literally no joy. Went through a period of depression, and was just very shut down emotionally across multiple emotions. And so this is one kind of pattern, right? Unable to feel any joy. And for me, one way I cope with sort of bad feelings was to shut down my feelings. I don't want to feel any feelings. I don't want to feel any good ones. I don't want to feel any bad ones. And for me, it was just a way to cope with what I was afraid of, very bad feelings, and it was easier to not feel anything. I've also suffered, for example, from workaholism, which was the only addiction that's very socially acceptable, but it has the same function as other addictions such as alcoholism and gambling addiction and whatnot. And so when I would have bad feelings, I would just go work harder, because then I would be more successful and I wouldn't have to feel my feelings, so I was too busy working, right? So these patterns, I guess, they give you insight into how somebody works and how they operate and how they function. You can apply it to yourself. You can sort of notice it in others. I probably would not tell other people about it in terms of diagnosing them, right? No one likes to be judged, but you can observe it and notice it. So there's a quick question here, clarifying question that I'll try to answer, which is, how can high EQ people experience most of the emotions with a level 0? Shouldn't the distribution be more even, right? It's probably more accurate to say that, if there are 50 emotions, we're not feeling all 50 emotions all the time, right? So for any one particular emotion, we're probably not experiencing at any given time. Now, as you get into a specific emotion, the most common occurrence of it for someone with high EQ is probably low. So, for example, like right now, I'm sitting on a very uncomfortable chair that's very quiet, right? Because I'm doing a recording, I'm doing a live webinar, and the comfortable chair makes lots of noises because it's an old chair. So I'm feeling like a level 2, level 3 of discomfort because my chair isn't as comfortable as I would like, right? When I woke up this morning, I was feeling a little tired, but I wasn't feeling particularly joyful. I wasn't feeling upset, nor joyful. I was sort of 0 around those feelings, and I had some degree of fatigue for the first 5 or 10 minutes. So I would say a high EQ person has, if you combine all positive feelings together as a group, I would say having a more even distribution, levels 1, 2, and 3 is fairly common. If we're talking about only one specific emotion, I would say that the most frequent occurrence is a level 0. for a specific, feeling on the feeling wheel. So that's just to clarify that particular point. Okay, so let's talk about a key insight here. I already alluded to this earlier. So most emotions come in pairs. There's anger versus peace, there's sadness versus joy, and so on and so forth. And I learned this the hard way. You can't turn off only the negative emotions. When you suppress emotions or repress emotions, you turn off the pair, okay? So suppress would be more like I am choosing not to feel something right now. Repress me would probably be more I can't feel it, like I don't have the capacity to feel it. An example would be, if you're someone in the military in a combat zone and you see a colleague or a friend or buddy get shot, right? They're wounded, right? At that moment in time, you might be inclined to grieve, right? But if you're a professional warrior, you might say, no, if I grieve now, I'm going to get killed. And in fact, I'm not even sure my buddy is dead, but he or she will get killed if I don't do my job, right, in this particular combat situation. I'm going to choose to suppress my negative feelings of grief in this moment, which also means I'm turning off the other feelings. I'm not going to feel anything until the combat situation is over, and then I'll deal with my feelings later. Okay, that's one way one reasonable way actually to use suppression of feelings, to simply time shift when you have time to experience the feeling more in a more open way. Okay, repress means I have no ability to feel anything, right? Even if I want to. Okay, that's an example of the difference. All right, so let's talk about back to our key 8 skills around self-awareness. We talked about the intensity range of feelings. And what I want to talk about now is how all this relates to making better informed decisions, both personally and professionally. All right, so number 3, better informed decisions. Here's the key idea. When you're emotionally self-aware, you're able to make just better informed life, career, and interpersonal decisions. You have more information to work with, and that gives you an information-based advantage. So here's a couple of examples. Let's say you're in a meeting, and you feel this very odd feeling, right? You feel threatened by the other person as the overriding emotional experience you had in this meeting with a particular potential client, for example. Okay, that would be an example of a feeling that can inform your decision making. Okay, and what you might decide to do is, I don't like that feeling, right? So American women in particular will use the word creepy. Like that person I get this creepy feeling. I don't know why, but I don't like it, and I'm going to stay away from that person, right? I think American men won't use the word creepy as much. They'll say, there's just something that's off, something off about that person. Doesn't feel right, right? That doesn't feel right. I can't pinpoint it, but I don't think we should work together. That's an example. Here is another example. I'm surprisingly excited at this job offer. It's not, or this graduate school admissions offer, it's not the highest paying, it's not the most prestigious, but as I looked into it, gosh, I'm really surprised how excited I am. I was going to turn down the offer, but maybe I need to pause for a second and reconsider, right? So that's an insight that the emotional part of you recognizes some new piece of information, and it informs the intellectual part of you. Say, hey, there's some new information here that maybe I considered incorrectly. And that can help you make a better decision. By the way, just neurobiologically speaking, there's 2 parts of the brain to oversimplify. There's the left and right hemispheres. The left hemisphere, which starts with the letter L, is the part of your brain that has to do with logic, which also starts with the letter L. That's how I remember it. And then the other side of the brain, the right side of the brain, has to do with emotions and feelings. Okay, so someone with a very high EQ has a very well-developed right side of the brain. And when they can articulate it verbally to other people, the verbal centers of the brain are in the left hemisphere, the same side as logic. So when you can express a feeling verbally, it means neurobiologically you are transferring that information from the right hemisphere, which is responsible for emotion, to the left hemisphere, which is responsible for logic, decision-making, judgment, and language. Okay. By the way, this is why therapy works. People who are forced to talk, not forced, but encouraged to share their feelings with a therapist or with a close friend, the act of expressing that verbally moves the information in the human brain from the right side to the left side and gives you better informed judgment and decision making. Okay, so that's kind of how it works at a mechanical level. All right, third one example is, after that meeting, I feel so angry that people assume my boss did the work and then she didn't correct them and explain that I did the work, right? I feel bad. I feel angry. This feels wrong, right? This too can inform your decision making. Should I say something or should I not? Should I advocate or say something to my boss or should I not, right? Generally, if you're feeling angry, it usually means you should do something about it, right? Anger is usually when there is something that is wrong, either a boundary has been crossed, like someone punched you in the face. I feel really angry about that, right? You're not supposed to do that. That's a boundary. Or an agreement has not been fulfilled. Hey, you promised to show up at 3 o'clock. Where were you? It's 4 o'clock. I'm really angry about that, right? Or there's some common value that's been violated. Hey, we agreed that we would be kind to each other and respectful, even though we're competitors, right? That was a low blow. Not cool. Not good. I'm angry about that. Okay, so anger is a very useful emotion because it usually means some agreement, value, social norm, physical boundary, emotional boundary some line has been crossed. And it's a good signal that something should be done. And if something is not done, the anger persists. And anger that persists is known as ongoing resentment, right? So the difference between anger and resentment is I'm angry for what happened today. When I feel resentment, it means I'm feeling angry about everything that happened the last 165 days or the last 10 years. I'm still angry about what happened in the year 2000, right? That's resentment. It's a very different feeling because it has a different time span. So anger unaddressed becomes resentment. If you sense somebody with resentment, it's usually not what you did or what's happening to them right now. It is an accumulation of many things that have happened to them over time, of which they felt a lot of anger in the moment, perhaps didn't do anything about it, and now they feel resentful. Okay? So these very subtle differences that can be very helpful. All right, when you have emotional self-awareness, that information again crosses over from the right side of your brain to the left side of your brain, and it informs intellectual decision making. You make better decisions because you have more information about yourself and how you're feeling about something, as well as eventually the information is about others as well. So here are my decision-making rules of thumb. If a decision makes sense logically and emotionally, I proceed, okay? I feel comfortable. So this is, my head says, hey, good idea, and my gut says, this is a good idea. Okay, let's proceed. If my logical and emotional judgment diverge, one says yes, the other says no, okay? Either my intellect says yes, my gut says no, or reverse. My gut says, yes, I want to do this. My intellect says, that's a really bad idea. What I do for myself is I call a decision-making timeout, and I have to pause, right? Okay, something's not right here. Part of me is noticing, coming to one conclusion. The other part of me is coming to the exact opposite conclusion. There must be, why is this occurring? There must be some piece of information that I don't have or I'm not super aware of where I can reconcile these two very diametrically opposed conclusions about a particular decision. I need to pause for a second and then explore my feelings more, do more homework intellectually around the opportunity, understand and try to tease out what my concern is. Sometimes feelings are kind of like a very blunt instrument. Think baseball bat rather than a scalpel surgeon. So you might feel a very general feeling like I'm feeling upset. And then you have to feel, well, what exactly is upsetting? Oh, I'm not sure. I have to think about that for a second. Let me feel into that. And then, it's the specific part of the situation I don't like that I'm feeling upset about. Okay, why? Oh, that makes sense. Okay, I see that now. Maybe we can try to address that concern. Okay? So when I experience feelings, it's generally more general, and then I have to pause a moment to think, like, what about that is causing this feeling? And then if I feel into it a little bit more, sort of the EQ version of think about it some more, I can try to ascertain what specifically is causing this negative feeling I'm having. So that's kind of the process I use personally. So when you have self-awareness, you can make better emotionally informed decisions. And when you can do all these skills, it forms the foundation for noticing other people's feelings. Okay? And that can be very, very useful in both personal and professional settings. And so let's talk about that now. Right? Your experience in self-awareness allows you to notice other people's feelings more easily. Okay? And when you're self-aware, it gives you a point of reference emotionally that allows you to recognize the emotions other people are experiencing. So for example, let's say I'm giving a presentation about a proposal and the person I'm proposing to seems scared, right, about what I'm proposing, which is really odd because there's nothing obvious that would seem to invoke or a response of fear in my audience. Like, it's certainly nothing intentional that I'm doing, right? And so in that particular case, like did I say something inappropriately? Is the person misinterpreting what I'm saying? Was there a concern, some kind of concern they're assuming would be true about my proposal that's not actually true, but I didn't really address it explicitly? There's something wrong here, right? If they're having an emotional reaction that I didn't anticipate and given the content of what I'm proposing, right, then we need to clear up some kind of miscommunication, right? So another one might be, if I tell my kids, we're going to Disney World, the expected emotional response I would expect would be excitement, right? Some kind of joy, something in the joy category, right? If one of my kids is scared, I'm like, oh, that seems odd. What's wrong? Why are you seem scared? Are you? Or are you feeling something else, right? And maybe it's, I'm afraid of roller coasters, right? So when my kids were younger, actually, I was the one afraid of roller coasters. My kids always wanted to go. It's the only thing I won't do with them. I will not go on a roller coaster that goes upside down. And maybe one of my kids thought that they have to go. I'm like, oh, no, all the rides are optional. So there's one ride, that your big sisters want to go on that's too scary for you. You don't have to go. Like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay. Right. So that's an example sort of in a personal situation. In a professional presentation, it might be, your proposal seems like it would imply a budget cut in my department. And you might say, oh, no, the funding is coming from, some other area. It doesn't impact your department. Oh, okay. Oh, I like your proposal then. If I don't have to lay off anybody, I'm all for what you're proposing in terms of your department area. Right. That's another example of that. Okay? So here's a second example. You're giving somebody a job offer and, there's like sort of 3 or 4 key parts of the role that you've offered to them and they're really excited about one of them, right? If you're trying to recruit them to get them to join, you can notice what part of the proposal they really liked and then really elaborate and provide more details around what that would look like day to day. Okay. So I do this in sales. I have clients who do this in sales is, I have a 3-part plan that I'm proposing, a project with 3 phases, right? Maybe phase 2 or part 2 of my proposal, they like a lot, right? But 1 and 3, not so much, right? Knowing that, I might talk more about phase 2. I could restructure the proposal so we don't do phases 1 and 3. We just do phase 2, right? Exclusively. Or we could do the part they like the most first, to sort of have a quick win and establish credibility. Or if I know phase 2 is the one they like the most, but they really need to do the other phases too, I might sort of put that as the last phase. So like, my kids love ice cream and desserts, right? So I always have that last. If I didn't make them eat their vegetables, they wouldn't, to be honest. And if I let them otherwise, they would eat ice cream, for the entire meal, right? So I put the thing they want the most at the end because I want them to do the other parts first, right? That's an example of that. Another example is, this other person, my colleague, seems really angry at me when our work was getting praised by other people. That seems odd, right? We just got a compliment. Why is my coworker mad? I need to go check in with him or her, right? So that's a skill we'll talk about in Module 4 around socially or emotionally aware relationship skills, is the skill of checking in, right? The emotional information versus the logical information is not matching here. Something's not quite right. I may not know what it is, but it's sort of like a prompt to go inquire more on either the logical side or the emotional side, right? And that's a very useful skill. I do that a lot, both personally and professionally. I do it with both my children and with other adults in my life, is checking in and inquiring when there's a disconnect or incongruence between the emotional information I'm observing in others and the logical information I am hearing from others. When those two don't match, there's something that's off, and it's a prompt to go explore more. So here's how the mechanism works between self-awareness and social awareness. So when you have a lot of emotionally oriented experiences, particularly across a wide range of feelings, this is sort of like your emotional experience database, right? You received a poor grade in school, you were disappointed, right? Naturally. That's like a level 2 or level 3 level of disappointment, right? And you can register what that feeling feels like, right? If both your parents died when you were a child, right? That's a level 10 level of grief, right? These sort of become data points, if you would, records, if you would, in a database, an experiential database. And what happens is you can sort of reverse engineer the feeling, right? So if you remember what it looked like, what it felt like to be disappointed and to feel disappointed, you can recognize that same feeling in other people, even though the cause of their disappointment might be something very, very different. So for example, grief. I've experienced a lot of grief in my life. As I meet other people from, from different countries, different social economic backgrounds, different life experiences, their day-to-day life experience is completely different than my own, right? Completely different. But they're still sad, right? Our human experiences are quite universal, and they cut across culture, time, and international boundaries. It is quite unifying. So I am surprised, as I've developed my own EQ skills, I was quite surprised at how much I have in common emotionally with people that I otherwise don't have anything in common with, as an example. So, for example, I was out in Cambodia a couple years ago, and I hired a taxi driver for the day, which is very, very inexpensive. Cambodia is a third world country. I think it was $40 to hire somebody for 8 hours. That's rental car plus driver plus them driving you around for a whole day for like $40. And as we were, as he and I were talking, he talked about how his sister was just got out of a bad marriage and feeling a lot of anxiety and concern and worry, and obviously I don't have a sister in Cambodia who's, leaving a bad marriage, but I recognized the feeling of worry. I could see it in his face. I could see the concern he had for his sister, the love he had for his sister. And we just talked a lot about our lives. And this is some person in the third world who speaks a language I can't speak, my income's got to be many, many times. I think the average income, is $140 per person per month, in Cambodia. Mine's considerably higher than that. And we have nothing in common, on paper. Yet our human experiences I totally got it, and we totally connected because I recognized the feelings he was going through and had gone through because I have too, right? This emotional experience database becomes our ability to link and have emotional connections to other people. Even if we don't understand their specific functional experiences, we can relate to the emotional experiences they had. So when my kids, when they lost their first pet, my oldest was probably, maybe 7 years old. My youngest was probably 7 or 8 years old. My youngest was 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old. And they were so devastated. They were so devastated they were so sad when their first pet died. And they've always remembered that feeling, right? That was their imprint. That was a record in their emotional experience database around grief, right? So when I say, so-and-so, one of my acquaintances, their parents passed away, right? And they're in hospice, sort of end of life kind of stuff. And they're really sad, right? And remember when you lost your guinea pig, how you felt about that? Yeah, well, they're feeling that right now. I feel so bad for them. Yeah, I know, me too. Right? That becomes a way to relate to other people. So the wider range of feelings you have experienced in your life, the more populated your emotional experience database, the wider range of intensities you've experienced across those feelings also populates your emotional experience database with more records. And again, the key insight again is if you can't recognize your own feelings, you can't recognize other people's feelings. Okay? So here's my sort of illustration of that. You seem sad, angry, resentful, right? You're trying to figure out what the other person is experiencing. You're wondering I sense some kind of emotional expression or facial expression, to signify some kind of feeling, but I can't tell what it is yet. What we do in that situation is we search through our emotional experience database, and then we try to figure out, we kind of try to guess in the right category of feelings, and then we can ask more emotionally informed questions of the other person. So, he seems sad to me. Why do you say that? Rather, you seem sad to me. Why do you say that? Or why does he say that? Because it looks like, his face looks like my face when my pet died, right? So I'm kind of thinking it might be sad, and you can check in and ask. So again, the self-awareness becomes a foundation for noticing other people's feelings. So how self-aware are you, right? What's the high-low scale? What's the equivalent of 100% versus 0% when it comes to emotional self-awareness? So I've kind of created this system. Frankly, I kind of made it up, to be honest, because a system like this doesn't exist. And I know a lot of my students like to quantify things because it's a way of understanding them, right? Math is a way to sort of put your arms around a very sometimes ambiguous topic. So here's my scale of emotional self-awareness, right? Level 1 means you have no idea what you're feeling. When I ask you, how are you feeling right now? And your honest answer is, I don't know, or nothing, right? And if someone asks you that every hour of every day, over the span of a week, if your answer is, well, I'm not feeling much of anything, right? That's probably like a level 1 in terms of emotional awareness. Okay? Level 2 is that you're aware that you're having a feeling, and you can kind of broadly classify it as positive, negative, or neutral. So, for example, I used to ask my kids, how are you feeling today, sweetie? And my youngest would give me a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or a thumbs sideways, right? So that was when she was quite young. She couldn't name the feelings on the feelings wheel, but she knew if something was good or bad. Okay, that's like a level 2 of awareness. Okay? Level 3 is knowing your feelings at the center of the feelings wheel, which we'll see again here in a second. I'm feeling mad. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling glad. Right, kind of the core 6 emotions. And these are sort of broad categories, right? There's 6 core feeling categories, sad and mad being 2 of them, and, joy and peacefulness being some of the other ones. If you can state your feeling in the right category, that's like a level 3, level of emotional self-awareness. Level 4 is the ability to identify more specific feelings within a major feeling category. And we'll give you some examples of that in a second. And step 5, level 5 really is you can identify 2 or more simultaneous feelings in 2 different categories, right? And that's more the example of feeling conflicted, right? Both a positive and a negative emotion, for example. All right. Level 1, here's sort of the test. What are you feeling right now? I don't know, right? Level 2 is, what are you feeling right now? Good, bad, okay. That's like one of my kids when they were much younger. Level 3, again, is what are you feeling right now? I'm feeling mad, I'm feeling sad, the broad categories of feelings. And level 4 is, these 6 categories, as I mentioned before, which is the inner part of the circle of feelings. Level 4, again, is a little bit more nuanced. It is when you ask, what are you feeling right now, or how are you feeling right now? It's not sad, which is a broad category. It's more specific. I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling ashamed. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling lonely. Those are all slight differences in nuances, right? So in the feelings wheel, it's that second layer outside of the course of the center of the circle, right? Those are the more nuanced feelings. And someone with a level 4 of emotional self-awareness can state their feelings sort of in that outer circle. Okay? Level 5 is where you can feel, 2 or more concurrent feelings from 2 different feeling categories, right? So it might be I'm feeling guilty but also excited. I got promoted, but my best friend at work did not. Or I got promoted, but now I will be my best friend's boss, right? And I'm feeling kind of awkward or guilty about that. Or my buddy and I were both up for the promotion. We're competing for the same promotion. I got the promotion, which I'm excited about, but he didn't. I'm feeling kind of bad because I got it maybe at his expense, because if I didn't, he would have gotten it, right? So that's a kind of more of a conflicted feeling. So this, again, goes back to the feelings wheel. Okay. The higher level of self-awareness, the further on the outer perimeter of the wheel you can get. And you can notice multiple feelings concurrently, either in the same category or in different categories. So this is the emotional self-awareness scale. And a great question to ask yourself right now is, where do you think you are on the scale? Yeah. How are you feeling right now? Do you know, right? Is it I'm not feeling anything, or I'm feeling something, but I'm not sure? Or is it super specific and subtle and nuanced? You can identify those small feelings. or you can identify the more subtle and more nuanced feelings. So this is a very useful tool for gauging your level of emotional self-awareness. We'll talk later about how to improve it. So if you're level 1, how do you get to level 2 and 3, for example? If you're level 3, how do you get to level 4 and 5? But for now, recognize this is kind of a good way to sort of track your progress sort of very loosely. Okay? So that's my self-awareness rating system. And what I want to do now is talk about the skill of accurate self-assessment. So one of the things people with a high EQ can do is they can assess themselves accurately. Right? So we talk about what I mean by that. So self-assessment has essentially 5 key skills. Knowing your own weaknesses, the ability to staff and build teams around your weaknesses. A third skill is asking others for help with your weaknesses. Number 4 is the ability to bond and connect with other people via your weaknesses. And the 5th skill is avoiding emotionally high-risk situations. Okay? So let's talk very briefly about these 5 skills and sort of how they work. So when you have self-assessment is very important because you get a better grasp of your capabilities, of what you can and cannot do well. Okay? It can be problematic if your self-assessment is either overly optimistic, where it's not really justified, or you're overly critical of yourself and your skills, and you don't put yourself in situations based on your own self-limiting beliefs about your own abilities. Okay? So it's useful to know exactly what you're good at and what you are not, and then to make career choices and life choices with that information in mind. Okay? So knowing your weaknesses helps you work around your weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. We're human beings. That's what we're born with weaknesses. That's just the way it works. The difference between someone with high EQ versus low EQ is the high EQ person knows what they're bad at, and they work around it, right? So, for example, the second skill is staffing around your weaknesses. If you are in a managerial position where you can hire other people, right, you want to hire people who are very good at the things you're very bad at. So, for example, have several staff, at least 3 people that are listening into this class. They are managing a lot of the technical details around hosting this class and trying to share with people and students from 50 countries around the world. There's like, I have a checklist here of all the things I needed to do before the start of this particular webinar. And I think it ended up being like 52 steps, right? Certain settings on my computer, turning on the microphone, checking it this way, checking it that way, rebooting the computer, making sure I have the latest version of this versus that. It's like 60 different little things. I am not good at that. I am not great at details. I appreciate them. So I have a staff, a team around me that's all very good at details because I am not, right? The difference is I realize I am not good at that. And rather than deny it or pretend I'm better than I am, I really accept that and embrace that's a limitation I have. But it doesn't negatively impact my career because I'm aware of what I'm not good at, and I get help from other people. Okay. Similarly, if you're in a situation where perhaps you don't have people you can hire, right? You're an individual contributor, then it is useful to know what your weaknesses are and whether they would be a liability to you on the job, right? So, for example, if the company culture is one where every person works individually, then you risk having negative consequences around the things that you're not good at, right? But if the company culture is one where you work in teams, right, then you can try to get on teams or get on teams with certain people whose strengths are the exact opposite of your weaknesses, right? So if I'm great, I'm not poor, if I'm bad at detail orientation, you want someone on your team that's very good at it. If I'm bad in finance, you want a finance expert, right? If I'm great in sales but terrible, with engineering, then I want a great engineer who can cover my weakness, right? So when you know what your weaknesses are, you want to find clever ways to make sure there's no negative impact from your career, from your weaknesses. That's the key insight here, okay? All right, now the next skill is asking others for help. And this speaks to reaching out to your either your professional network or your personal support network. It helps to know what your weaknesses are, where you need more help. For example, I have not done a lot of venture financing, in my career. I don't do anything with the capital markets like IPOs, trading securities, taking companies public, that kind of thing. I have never published a book through a major publisher. I don't know tax very well. Search engine optimization, I know a little bit, but I'm really out of date on it. So in these specific areas, for example, I have reached out to and asked people in my professional network for help in all of these areas, right? And they in turn asked me for help in the areas I know well that they do not. So we collaborate a lot, right? And we collaborate around one person's weakness, which happens to be the other person's strength, right? So it's a great way to build partnerships, a great way to build alliances. It's a great way to build more informal professional networks. It's, hey, how would you feel if we just sort of helped each other out in our careers? You're great in finance, I'm great in sales. If you got a sales question, why don't you ask me? And if I have a finance question, could I ask you? Would that be okay? Would you be open to that, right? When you're both aware of your weaknesses, you can build these partnerships to make sure your weaknesses don't have a negative impact on your career, okay? So this is subtle, right? It's not that you have no weaknesses. This is really about managing your situation by being well informed of your weaknesses and an accurate assessment of your weaknesses and arranging your affairs, arranging your relationships, arranging your efforts such that there's no negative impact from your weaknesses. That's the key point here, okay? Another one around weaknesses that's very beneficial is bonding. People admire you for your strengths, but they connect with you emotionally through your weaknesses, right? And through your difficulties, challenges, and adversity. For example, for myself, I'm known for the case interview. I get the sense I'm very well respected for that. And I wrote about, I've written a lot about the case interview. But it's very interesting. The things I've written about where I talk about my failures get a lot more responses, a lot more comments, more emails. And I remember the first couple of times I did that about, major failures, in my life and my career. A lot of people wrote in saying, oh, wow, it's just, I didn't realize that you struggle too. I'm like, of course I do. I'm a human being. I screw up all the time. I don't always talk about it. I don't always share it, but I certainly have them. I'm not hiding them. It's more like most people don't particularly care to want to know, is my perception. But what I realize is that it's more humanizing, right? That, the same things you struggle with, I do too. You know why? Because we're human beings, and human beings have struggles. We have weaknesses. So one of the ways you can do is you can bond around your weaknesses, right? So for example, my kids are great with gymnastics. They're very flexible, like at a muscular level. And there's this gymnastics move that I used to be able to do. I can't do anymore. It's called a bridge, right? And basically it is lying down on the floor on your back and then putting your hands above your head and your feet on the floor and basically making kind of like kind of a U shape with your body, where your belly button and your chest is facing the ceiling and your backside is facing the ground, right? And making yourself a U, kind of bending backwards, into basically making your body into a bridge. Now, I spent the last 20 years of my life, my career, sitting in a computer, which is the exact opposite. I'm hunched over, right? Kind of with computer posture. And so I used to be able to do a bridge. I could do it quite well, and now I can't do it at all, right? So my kids are now teaching me, right? And we have these regular practice sessions, and I'm terrible at it. And they laugh a lot. It's a bonding experience. Many of my professional contacts I met at a conference or multiple conferences over the last 20 years. We're both weak in a particular area, want to learn more, right? And it's one area we had in common. A lot of my close friends I've met in various support groups because there's some aspect of our lives we want to work on improving, and we got to know each other, and we bonded around our weaknesses. So weaknesses aren't a bad thing. They're just a realistic, real-world thing. You're going to have them. The question really is, what do you do with them? And these are some of the skills that someone with high emotional intelligence will do with them. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we bond and identify people based on their weaknesses, even if we do admire them for their strengths. Okay, the fifth skill around self-assessment is avoiding emotionally high-risk situations. So I'll give you two personal examples. One might be more personal than I feel comfortable with, but it's in here, so I'll share it. So when I'm around verbally abusive people, people who use, four-letter words a lot directed at personal attacks, I have a very high level of distress. Like, I don't function well in that kind of situation. And one of my great strengths is thinking logically. And my ability to think logically when I'm being verbally abused by somebody, my ability to think shuts down completely, right? And I am shocked how poor a thinker I am under that kind of distress. So I know that about myself now, right? So I know that this is not a good situation for me, and I work really hard to avoid them, right? And there's certain people I've met who are acquaintances where I sense this level, their ability their EQ skills are so low. I don't want to get closer to them, because I can sense that this kind of behavior, at least in these specific people, are more likely, and I don't want to be close to them when they don't go there. Okay. Another example is there's this movie called When Harry Met Sally, and it's an old movie, but for people who grew up in the 80s like I did, it was one that's been talked about a lot. And the premise of the movie is, can men and women be friends, right? And that's the premise of the movie. It's an interesting topic. For myself, what I realized is that I can't be close friends. I can be acquaintances, but I can't be really close friends with a woman that I'm attracted to in a romantic way when the relationship is not romantic, right? It just doesn't work well for me. And I learned the hard way because I had a very close friend that I was attracted to who was not attracted to me. This was after my divorce. And it just went sideways. It just did not end well. And I realized that's not a good situation for me. It was a very painful situation for all of us. Let's just avoid that. I want to avoid that in the future. Okay. So people with high EQ, they get a sense of what things work for them and what things do not, and what areas are really high risk. So for me, my ability to think is my great strength, except with around certain kinds of behaviors, my ability to think goes to absolutely zero, right? Shockingly so. And I am deathly afraid of that because my ability to think gets me out of trouble. But, if someone can push the off button on my brain where I can't think, that's really scary, a really scary possibility for me. So I know to never get even close to those kinds of situations and to avoid people in relationships that have that kind of aspect to them. I know to stay away. Okay, that's a personal choice. Everyone should have some sense of what kinds of situations that they don't like, that aren't good for them, and work to actively avoid them. Okay, and that's, again, that goes to having some sense of self-assessment, of knowing what are high-risk situations for yourself, which again informs your intellectual decision-making to avoid the kinds of people and circumstances where those high-risk situations will be far more likely to occur. Okay, that's why it's useful. When you misunderstand yourself and you over or under assess your abilities and you over or under assess, what situations are high risk for you, you make worse decisions. That's just the gist of it. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about what I call parent-developed self-awareness. Okay. And this is really about, how does self-awareness develop more organically or more naturally, right? And here's the general idea. I like this cartoon, it's very cute. Add some color to my presentation. High EQ parents raise high EQ children is basically the way it works. So a parent has a high EQ parent has good self-awareness, good emotional self-regulation, good social awareness to pay attention to cues from their child about the child's emotions. And this ends up allowing them to parent in a more emotionally aware kind of way, right? And so there's something applying the emotionally informed relationship skills to their child. And then this, in turn, raises children that are more emotionally intelligent. Okay? So the mechanism, though, is here how it works. Here is how it works. You have a parent who has good self-awareness, which allows them to self-regulate better. They have good social awareness or awareness of other people, including their child, and they can interact with their children in a more emotionally informed way. Right? Then this ability to parent in a more emotionally informed way is what allows a child who was raised in that kind of environment to be more emotionally self-aware. So I'll give you an example. So if you're talking to a very young child and they're very frustrated, right? And so what a parent might organically or naturally say is, honey, you look very angry, right? You're clenching your jaw, right? Your eyes and your face are all scrunched up, right? You're clenching your jaw and you are crossing your arms. Wow, you seem like you might be angry. Okay, so notice what I did there. Right? And this is a skill I actually do with my kids, and I got this skill from a therapist, a children's therapist. And what I'm doing is I am articulating the nonverbal behaviors the nonverbal behaviors I'm observing in my child, and I'm linking it to a feeling, and I'm labeling the feeling. You seem frustrated because you are crossing your arms and stomping your feet. Okay? Now, a child might be aware they're stomping with their feet. They might be aware they're crossing their arms and they really stop to think about it. But they may not be aware that the feeling they're experiencing is called frustration. Right? So when you, as a parent, when you mirror the emotional experience that you're observing from your children, it helps give them the emotional vocabulary, right? So what is the difference between a child feeling frustrated versus irritated? Irritated versus resentful. Resentful versus merely angry, right? So with my kids, I will tell them what I think they're experiencing. I will point out the specific nonverbal cues, right? And that were my clues. And then they can tell me if that's true or not. And when they're younger, they can't tell me. They just remember the word, right? And say, are you feeling frustrated again? Like, yes, frustrated. You didn't do this, Daddy. Like, oh, okay, I can work on that. We can talk about it, or we can come up to an agreement of some kind. Okay? So when a child is being interacted with an adult caregiver or a parent that is emotionally very aware and very informed, they learn sort of through observation, and they learn sort of what I call learning through osmosis, to take a science term. And that gives the child foundation for their own emotional self-awareness. Okay? A lot of children, actually all children, cannot emotionally self-regulate very well when they are young, right? An infant is born, they start crying, right? Like literally from the first second of birth and life, there's no self-regulation, okay? It is both a learned skill. I have found, at least in my own kids, some of them it's easier for some of them than others, right? So I am sure there are some natural, genetic components, right, to one's capacity for self-regulation. But it is also a learned skill, and it is a learned skill when a emotionally informed parent sort of helps the child self-regulate, okay? So for example, one of my kids has very high anger, right? Will say basically really mean things to me. And so I will point out, hey, honey, you seem very angry, right? You're not using any words. You're going, you're grunting a lot, right? And you're clenching your fists, both your fists. Ma, you seem really angry, right? So again, that's informing, that's using my awareness of their emotional state. They're hearing it, and hopefully over time, they're internalizing, oh, that must be what frustration sounds like or feels like, okay? Then sometimes one of my children will say mean things about me, right? They're just being mean, mostly because they're upset. And so I'll say, honey, that's, I can tell you're really angry, and, but your words are not very kind and respectful to me. If you really need to say those mean things, I would like you to go in the restroom. I'd like you to close the door, turn on the fan, and you can say it to the mirror where I don't have to hear it, right? And that's a signal that that behavior is not appropriate nor tolerable to me. Okay? If they won't do that, I will say, honey, I can see you're very angry. I want to talk to you about that. But the kinds of words you're using do not work for me. Right? I'm going to go into my room, and I'll come back every 10 minutes, and I will ask you if you are ready to talk to me. Right? Again, a signal that I acknowledge the feeling. Your feeling is valid. You're angry. And we can do something about it, but you can't say those words to me. That doesn't work for me, okay? And so a child learns, they stepped over a boundary of some kind, right? And they start to learn where the edges are of what's permissible behavior, and that's, again, forms the foundation of emotional self-regulation, okay? And then there are actual skills you can teach them, such as, honey, take 5 deep breaths, and then let's talk about it. Oh, okay, so that's a relaxation technique, and we'll talk more about that later as well. All right. Once you have that foundation of self-awareness, that again feeds self-regulation, for the child. So they're getting it from both internally as well as from the parent. And then that helps them build social awareness, so they can start seeing those same feelings, for example, in their classmates. And that helps, again, develop their own emotionally informed relationship skills. So, like a lot of things, if I grew up speaking Chinese in my household. I don't speak Spanish, right? Or I didn't speak Spanish. I had to go learn it somewhere else. A lot of things you sort of learn in the household based on like what your parents were like. So it's a very common pattern with a lot of different skills, including emotional intelligence. So Emotionally informed parenting is one way one can learn these skills. But what do you do if you're like me and like your parents were good at many things, just not emotionally, super strong on the emotional intelligence front? There's a second category of learning called reparenting. And what reparenting really is essentially teaching yourself the skills you did not acquire naturally during your childhood. That's all that is. Right? And there's two ways to reparent. One is a lot of the exercises will teach you, like some of the skills I'll teach you, both in this session for today and in our subsequent modules. And some people, particularly if there's a lot of trauma in their life, they're not able to reparent themselves because the level of trauma is so intense and the negative feelings are overwhelming so often that the self-taught skills don't work very well. In those cases, and I've done this for myself, is I've hired a therapist who can reparent me, tell me all the things that are useful for me to know for better emotional functioning, because I'm not yet able to teach it to myself. And as I've gotten better with that, I've been able to teach it both to myself and teach it to my kids. So that's an example of reparenting. Very, very useful set of tools, and many of the exercises that I'll be teaching you today in this whole class are basically reparenting type exercises. All right, so we talked about parent-developed self-awareness, and now let's talk about how to improve your own self-awareness. This goes into the category of reparenting, right, or self-help, if you would, and how do you improve those areas as an adult in this point in time on your own. So they're really, and I mentioned sort of this already, there's two ways. You can sort of do these exercises to improve your self-awareness, or you can help hire a therapist who will help walk you through those own set of exercises or very similar ones and help you develop those skills maybe with more coaching and more support, okay? And what we're trying to do is, the exercises I'll teach work best sort of in the under 5 range, if you would, and professional therapy works best when the negative emotions, especially negative emotions, are very intense in the overwhelming level, right? If you're overwhelmed, it's very hard to function well, and professional therapy is very useful for that. So self-awareness is super simple, deceptively so. So, it's really asking yourself 3 questions very, very regularly. And I've done this myself. I have had my kids do it. I have had friends do it. It works really well, even though it seems like it shouldn't. So let me explain what I mean by them. And the key is to ask yourself these questions regularly. There's an app on my iPhone that I like a lot called Hourly Chime. And basically, it is a timer that goes off every hour. Okay? And so what I have suggested to others is set a timer for yourself. Every hour, at the top of the hour, between your appointments and your calendar items, the app goes off, it alarms, and then ask yourself these 3 questions. What am I feeling right now? Again, the answer has to be on the feeling wheel. The answer has to be on the feeling wheel. It cannot be good or bad or okay. What am I feeling right now? Take out the feeling wheel, look at it, think about it for a second, or feel into it is the term I prefer to say. Which feeling are you actually feeling right now? What are you experiencing? Not intellectually what feeling should you be experiencing, but what feeling are you actually experiencing? Okay. Depending on your self-awareness level, you might not know. Okay. And the temptation is, if you don't know, the temptation is to not even bother asking the question. Okay? The point of the exercise is, if you're so used to asking yourself the question, or in the case of an emotionally aware parent, when an emotionally aware parent asks a child that question a lot, eventually the child has an answer. It might take weeks, months, and months for them to kind of get used to the idea, but that is the mechanism by how it works. So, how are you feeling right now? I'm actually asking you, what are you feeling right now? Right? Do you know? Is your answer in the general category? Is it more specific? Right? Is it mad or irritated, as an example? Okay? So that's a very useful question to ask yourself. The 2 other questions, I'll give you some more examples of this in a second, is what do I want right now and what do I need right now? So let's kind of go through each of these questions and give you a little more detail around them. So as in, what am I feeling right now? Every hour, pick a feeling, right? what feeling are you feeling right now? Right? And I had a great support group leader who would ask this question a lot. And the most common answer is, I'm not sure what I'm feeling right now, or I'm not sure how I feel about XYZ situation. And he would say, well, if you were sure what you were feeling, what feeling would it be? If you had to guess what feeling you're feeling, what would it be? And invariably what ends up happening is everyone who's asked the question usually has a feeling in mind, but sometimes they're embarrassed by the feeling. They feel like they're not supposed to have that feeling and don't want to say it out loud. And so a great way to phrase that is, if you did have a feeling about this situation, what would it be? If you had to imagine what you're feeling right now, what would you imagine your current feeling to be? If you had to guess or speculate what feeling you're feeling right now, what would it be? Right? And the trick really is keep asking yourself the question, even if you don't have an answer, right? Your brain gets tired of questions that get repeated over and over again that seem like they're fairly simple questions, but you can't answer them. Your brain does not like that. The feeling part of your brain does not like that. And it will start to wonder, like, wow, why couldn't I answer that simple question of what am I feeling right now? Seems like I should. Well, what am I feeling right now? I'm not sure. Let me think about that for a second. Let me feel into that for a second. Maybe I'm a little hungry. Maybe, right? So the more you ask yourself, the more prompts you give yourself to try to ascertain and be aware of your own feelings, and the more you develop that capacity and skill. So think of it as a muscle, right? You go to the gym, you lift a weight. The more you lift it, the stronger it gets. Same idea, except rather than lifting a weight, you ask your brain and your psyche a question, right? What are you feeling right now? That's it. That's better than any exercise I could possibly think of. That question is probably the simplest way and most effective way to build greater self-awareness, within the realm short of going to professional therapy. Okay, what are you feeling right now? Okay. Second question is, what do I want right now? Right? I find a lot of people don't actually know what they want or need. They're very aware of what everyone else wants for them. Right? So a classic example is, I got into grad school, should I go? My mom and dad really want me to, right? Or I'm told everyone's going into McKinsey and consulting, I feel like I'm supposed to, but I don't know if I should. Well, what do you want? I don't know. Well, if you don't know, it's very hard to make a good decision, right? So high emotional intelligence is about knowing what you want. So let me give you an example. I have one of my daughters who, when she was much younger, was very poor at this, okay? And she would get very angry a lot. So she would have no anger and then spike to a very high level of anger with nothing in the middle, right? And so for me, I recognized in her situation, it was a sign that her needs were not getting met and she was upset that what she wanted wasn't happening. Now, the problem is she didn't know what she wants. She couldn't tell you in advance. She would just be mad after the fact when it didn't happen. Right? So that's not a great ideal skill set, but when someone's 5 years old, that's what, sometimes that's what you have to work with, right? So one of the things I would do with my daughter, I did this for about a half a year, and I would ask her, what do you want for dinner? Okay, super simple question. And her answer was, well, whatever my older sister wants. Right? I asked 50 times, what do you want for dinner? Oh, whatever else my older sister wants. Okay. And so what she was really saying was, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm so used to someone else telling me what I want. And so what I would do is I would keep asking, what do you want right now? So I did that for every day, virtually every day for 3 months. So I asked her 90 times in a row, and I got either I don't know, I don't care, or whatever my sister wants. Those were the three answers I got back fairly consistently. And what ended up happening was maybe 3 months into the process, she just said, I don't know what I want, but I know I don't want pizza tonight. So it was a non-want, right? I don't want pizza, but anything else is okay, right? Oh, I'll take that, right? So I had to ask literally 100 times over 100 days, and I get kind of like a non-answer or inverse answer. And I said, okay, great. We will do something other than pizza today, right? And then that went on for about another 3 months. She'd always tell me what she did not want. And then after a combined 6 months, we ended up, she could tell me, like, I want Mexican food. I want Japanese. Right, Dad? I want this. I want that. And like, oh, great. Now she knows what she wants, and it's very easy for her. Okay. Next question is, what do I need right now? Which is very similar. The difference between a want and a need is sort of a need is, as the word implies, sort of a necessity. Whereas a want is a little bit more optional. If you didn't get it, you'd be okay. I want to eat Japanese food tonight, but if I don't, I'll be okay. I'm going to live, right? A need is stronger than that. So here are some examples. I need to breathe, right? I had this bad habit, which is terrible from a biological standpoint. I'm so engrossed in my work, I stop breathing. I forget to breathe. And then I have to take a deep breath because I forgot, right? It seems very odd because breathing is supposed to be an autonomic response system movement, but there are times where I forget to take a breath in, and then I have to take a much bigger one. So sometimes I just need to take a deep breath, right? Right before my presentation, our class today, I realized I need to go to the bathroom, right? Not if I need to go now because I'll be teaching for a couple hours. I think that's what I need to do right now, right? I need to, when I'm driving with my kids, particularly when I drive in downtown Seattle in areas in rush hour where there are bicycles, there are pedestrians, there are drivers and bad drivers and construction crews. I cannot drive safely when my kids are arguing in the back of the car. So I'll say, guys, I need it quiet, at least until we get to the freeway where I can drive in a straight line. But right now I have to concentrate on so much stuff outside the car. I cannot be paying attention to stuff in the car. I'm going to ask you girls to be quiet for the next 5 minutes, right? And they're used to that. And they'll be quiet for 5 minutes. And then they'll start arguing once I say it's okay. So, hey, and they met my need, my request as I stated it, but not one bit more. And then for me personally, I like to go to the movies in a theater as opposed to watching at home on TV. So every month or two, I'll make a specific point to go see a movie in the biggest screen I can find, which in Seattle is the big IMAX screen at the Science Center we have here. I love that theater. It's amazing. And it's not even a want. I realize I actually need it. I'm not entirely sure why, but I know it's an important need for me. So I make time for that for myself. So that sort of is the importance or the method for improving your own self-awareness. Just ask yourself 3 questions every hour. If you did it every day, every hour during waking hours for the next 30, 60, 90 days, you will develop a higher level of self-awareness. I guarantee you, right? What are you feeling? What do you want right now? What do you need? What are you feeling right now? What do you want right now? What do you need right now? Those are 3 foundational questions around self-awareness. They're not very complicated questions. It's not rocket science, right? It is very simple. What are you feeling? What do you want right now? What do you need right now? Right? If you can just answer those 3 questions fairly easily and regularly, you will develop a much higher level of self-awareness. And even if you cannot answer those questions right away, keep asking yourself. That's the big insight. Keep asking, and you will eventually get tired of not having an answer, is what happens. I've done this and experienced this myself. And it ends up allowing you to develop that skill and capacity within yourself. Okay? So that's our overview for self-awareness. We started off talking about feelings and identifying them. We talked about intensity ranges, how your own self-awareness becomes a way to recognize other people's feelings. I gave you a scale for figuring out how self-aware you are, right? And it helps you measure your sense of progress in self-awareness. We talked about the importance of knowing yourself very well in terms of assessing your own abilities, particularly your weaknesses. I didn't talk about assessing your strengths, but that's equally important, And if you know what you're good at, put yourself in situations where that's of an advantage. So, for example, for myself, I'm very good at taking very complicated ideas and making them simpler and accessible to others. I'm also good at troubleshooting. Those are the 2 things I'm good at professionally. And if a professional opportunity comes along that where those 2 skills don't make a difference in terms of a better outcome, I don't pursue them because I have no advantage over anybody else, and I avoid them. Right? That's an example of being accurate self-assessment, and then making, again, emotionally informed choices in your career based on this information, in this case, your own self-assessment. And we talked about how, where does self-awareness come from naturally? And then, how do you get it and develop it on your own if you didn't happen to have that in your childhood? So that's the overview of self-awareness. And what I want to do is sort of close out this module and switch to our question and answer session. There is a control panel on your, control panel in the web conferencing software that will allow you to ask questions. If you can sort of open up that part of the control panel, I would be happy to answer any questions related, to self-awareness. If there are questions related to the other topics I'll be covering in a subsequent session, I prefer to go through those in my slides in my lesson before handling those questions. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have that or anything you found confusing about developing self-awareness. Okay, so the first question I have is, why is it that we bond around our weaknesses and not our strengths? It's a great question. I'm trying to think of why I have observed it. It's extremely consistent in my experience, extremely. And I think that there is something quite vulnerable about sharing your weaknesses with other people, right? It takes away all sense of prestige, social status, and hierarchy. So when the CEO says, like if there's a big merger going on, right, and all the employees are kind of nervous of what does this merger mean for me, right? It can be quite bonding when the CEO says, I'm kind of nervous too. I've never done this before. So if you're feeling nervous, guess what? You're not alone. I am too. But you know what? Here's what I'm thinking. And this is what I say to myself, and I'll share those thoughts with you. I'm thinking, what an amazing opportunity it is for us as a team and a group. I'm thinking, wow, like how much better we'll be to serve our customers with this merger. I'm thinking about how much more competitive we'll be versus the competition with this merger. So at the same time, I'm excited yet nervous, right? That's that level 5 level of emotional self-awareness. I am feeling two conflicting feelings. I am excited, which is a positive feeling, and I'm feeling nervous, right, which is a negative feeling. I'm feeling both at the same time. Okay, so when people, now like for the average person, they have nothing in common with the CEO. They won't have the same income level. They won't have the same social circle. In many cases, they won't have the same educational background. They don't drive the same kind of car. There's nothing that's in common except weaknesses rather, and negative feelings are ways that are very kind of level the playing field because we all have the same emotions, the same range in our lifetimes. So I find it's a very unifying way, right, to emotionally connect with other people. Now, in terms of connecting around strengths, you can do that too. Some people just have more functional relationships with people with shared strengths. So we're both athletes on the same soccer team, okay, or same football team, depending on where you live in the world. And we're both good at soccer, and we've developed a kind of teammate relationship around being very good at soccer, okay? That's like a professional colleague type of relationship. Now, if one of us says, I'm really worried that I can't play at the next level, right? Well, I don't think I'll make professional. I can only play college. Or, if we're high school teammates, I don't think I can play in college. I'm really worried about that. And I'll be so bummed if that's like, oh, I could totally relate. Me too, right? I mean, I've been playing soccer my whole life. I've been playing football my whole life. And I can't imagine what it'd be like without it. Like, I can totally relate, right? So the emotional and bonding around weaknesses and negative experiences is very bonding, right? So I think I was in New York a few months ago, and I was reflecting on 9/11, right? September 11th, the terrorist attacks many years ago. And the people who were all in New York on that day when they experienced all that chaos and horror and all that grief. There's something very bonding about those who survived. They did it together, okay? So negative experiences, negative feelings, weaknesses, they just level the playing field. We're all the same because we have the same emotional range, and it takes a lot of the other stuff, it takes it away, and it gets us down to our core humanity. So I think that's why, my theory as to why we tend to bond around that. All right, next question is, how do we recognize our strengths? This person who is asking says, I find that it's easier to say I'm bad at something and notice my weaknesses than to say I'm good at, because being good at something often requires having external proof or recognition. Okay, very fair point. It's so funny. I did this sort of personal strategic plan, like, I don't know, like 12, 15 years ago. And one of the questions that was asked was, what are your gifts? What are your strengths? And rather than asking me, they had me send a survey out to basically people that knew me from various stages of my life. So like I had family members in there, like maybe like one friend from high school and one from college. I had one person, from my McKinsey days, one person sort of more recently. And it was really interesting. They all say the same thing, ever since high school, I was very good at, taking very complicated ideas and making them simple. Problem solving, right? Those are my two strengths. So everyone but me had the same answer. It was unanimous. Those were my two strengths going back basically my entire lifetime. And I was the only one surprised by it. So quite often it is hard to know what you are good at, but it is appropriate to ask others that will be objective about it, right? So don't ask someone who hates you, what are you good at? Oh, you're good at nothing, right? You're terrible. But ask past bosses, ask, trusted colleagues and coworkers, hey, what am I good at? I'm trying to understand myself better. What do you think I'm good at? I think that's probably a very good way. And I think the qualitative feedback is as useful, as say like an award or a job offer. Those recognitions, while they have validity, there's an element of timing. Not every skill you're good at would necessarily have some kind of external validator, right? If there's no troubleshooting award, right? Yes, I did well at the case interview because of troubleshooting, but I didn't recognize I was good at troubleshooting in and of itself. It was sort of through a skill that's enabled by troubleshooting, as an example. So just be sort of open-minded about that. All right, the next question is, what is the difference between a want and a need? Need really is something where it is essential and core to your functioning, right? I need to sleep because if I don't, I will be unable to add and do arithmetic, or I'll be unable to be kind and respectful to other people. Like, I really need it, okay? A want is more something that gives you more, so a need helps you function at a sort of a baseline level. A want is something that helps you experience greater joy, right? So to avoid negativity, you need your basic needs met. To have more positive experience in life, you need some wants, right? So for example, for me, like I need a relatively peaceful environment most of the time. What I want is I want to travel internationally a lot. I get such a great sense of joy and adventure from traveling. But if I don't have it, I'm going to function okay. I can still go to my job, or I can still raise my kids. I can still, do arithmetic. I can still have conversations with my kids. It's not going to negatively impact me. So in some ways, a need is a way of avoiding negative impact, whereas a want is a way to seek positive impact. Right? So for me, like seeing a movie seems like it would be more of a want. But in my case, like, sometimes I just need to get out of my life. I cannot be in my own house, my own apartment or whatever, my own office, my own desk. I want to be in another place, in this case, virtually. And so I go to a movie theater, it's a different physical place, and I get lost in the fiction of it, right? And for me, it is a good way for me to relax. And so I consider that a need. It's not everyone would. Most people probably would not. So that's the distinction between a want versus need. Okay, so in terms of the emotional intensity scale, how do we compare emotions, for example, a level 5 versus a 6? And what can we get out of the comparing emotions at that level of granularities, right? So does it really matter if it's a level 5 or a 6? I would say that's sort of a... Again, this is not an official, recognized scale outside of our class. I think I use the scale as a way to illustrate a new concept in using terms that many of you are more familiar with, numerical terms in this case, because it's very cross-cultural. Most of my readers are very fluent in math. So whether it's a 5 or 6 really doesn't matter a whole lot, to be honest. What matters more would be increments of 3 or 4, right? A 1 versus a 5 makes a really big difference, right? Because it means that your level 5 intensity, it has a bigger impact on you. You're feeling it more intensely, and the message that comes with the feeling should be taken more seriously, and more action is likely needed to address that high level of intensity. If you are level 5 versus level 10, I would say 5 and lower is a fairly common level of emotional range for everyday life. Over level 5 into the 10 for someone with high EQ who is sort of emotionally functioning very well should be very rare. Okay? It should be very rare. But if you or someone you know is always at level 10 all the time, right, or quite regularly, like every day or even every week, like that's atypical. It has a lot of negative consequences, and it might be worth trying to do something about that and try to work on that. Okay? And so again, 3 versus 4, 5 versus 6, not a huge difference. One of the things I mentioned earlier was our knowing your emotions and knowing the intensity helps inform you in terms of what level of action you might need to take. Okay, so for example, let's use anger because it's a very easy one to understand. If you're feeling an anger level 5, that means that the emotional part of you has experienced a very high violation of some, or a perception of a violation of some sort. Either a promise that was not kept, a physical boundary was crossed, like someone punched you in the face, right? Like, I'm angry about that. I'm really angry about that, right? Or there's some social norm that was violated, like, hey, in this company, we are more respectful than using those words, right? And, if it's a level 1, it's like, okay, in the person's speech, they use the pronoun he instead of she, or didn't alternate, or didn't use we, right? I'm a little irritated by that, okay? As opposed to someone was sexually harassed, right? That's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? That's a much higher, more intense level of reaction. And when you are aware of how you're experiencing a feeling, it can help inform you to what level of reaction you might need to take. So, for example, I was at a meeting where, I forget what meeting it was, but it's a training session for some volunteer work I'm doing for disaster preparedness. And the instructor kept referring to team members as he, right? And as someone who's raising daughters, I try very sensitive and aware of this. And I forgot to do this actually, which reminds me, I need to go back and make the suggestion of, could you use the pronoun she once in a while, because it's more inclusive of the many women who were in the class. It's more accurate statistically to include them some of the time, and less exclusionary, right? As opposed to if I saw somebody sexually harass somebody in the workplace, that's like, intervene, call HR, see if there was a criminal violation, and being very aggressively and firmly. If it's in a company that I'm advising, you need to fire them, right? Or you risk, because it's the right thing to do, and also capture your legal liability. You also need to protect your employees, right? The level of response is quite different when the intense level is quite different. So it's just another piece of information that's going to be very, very useful. Okay, next question is, let's see. Being self-aware is the foundation for being aware of other people's emotions. Just want to be sure I understand that. Yes. So the skill of recognizing your own emotions is the same skill to recognize other people's emotions, right? So I know when I am irritated because my vocabulary changes, my voice inflection changes to a more curt, like my sentences get shorter. There are fewer words, like, normally I'm, hey, how's it going? I prefer that if we sort of did it this way versus that way. When I'm irritated, I'd say, no, do it this way, right? I use the sort of more command language. I'm very abrupt. I'm very curt. I go, I must be irritated. Okay, why am I irritated? What's bothering me, right? I can ask myself. So when you are aware of your own emotional feelings, what you want to do is you want to both be aware of what you're feeling, but then also pay attention to your own behavior changes when you're feeling them. That's the sort of the nuance that's very important. So if you are like resentful, right, that's a very, notice how that feels for you and what you do differently, okay? And it's a learning process, right? So even now with certain feelings, I don't feel that often because they're newer feelings for me. I'm still on the learning curve around that. Like how do I experience trepidation, right? Which is sort of a fear combined with anxiety, it's a very subtle feeling, right? How does that come across for me? How do I feel that? Do I feel that in my chest? Is it in my hands? Does my breathing shift? Does my vocal inflections change? what changes for me? So as you start to notice that, it gives you the ability to recognize the same patterns or similar patterns in other people. Now, and we'll get to this later on in terms of other people's feelings and social awareness. The level of social recognition of other people's feelings is not super precise, right? Yeah, you're sort of in the right category, you're close, and it's really just a prompt to inquire further. And that ability to notice reactions in others comes from noticing the same reactions and same feelings in yourself. And quite often, the signs of a lot of emotions are surprisingly universal. So when I am seeing somebody in a completely different country who is experiencing resentment, right, at a spouse or a child in a shopping mall in a language I don't understand, like I can tell. I know parents. I am a parent. I know challenges with kids, and I recognize the feeling, and that expression because I've had it, right? And this is a true story, and I can relate, right? And it helps clue me in. All right. So this next question is from someone who says, "Hey, I understand asking myself, what am I feeling right now? But I don't understand why I should ask what I want or what I need now," right? That seems confusing. So here's why, from a strategic standpoint. If you don't know what you want or need right now in your life, then you are highly susceptible to doing what others want and need you to do only. Okay? So the risk of that is you end up in very one-sided relationships, or you end up in situations where your role is primarily to meet the needs of other people, but not your own. Okay? So we'll talk more about this in emotionally aware relationship skills. But good relationships, healthy relationships, are ones that are mutually beneficial. So if you and I are colleagues and we are coworkers, we should both benefit from the relationship. If we are friends, we should both get something out of the friendship, right? So healthy relationships are mutually beneficial. When you don't know what you want and you don't know what you need in terms of either taking care of yourself and fulfilling those wants and needs yourself, or getting what you want and need through other people. So if you and I are friends, you don't know what you want and you don't know what you need, there's no way I can guess what you want and need, right? So if I want to be a good friend, I want to give you what you want and what you need from the friendship, right? But if you don't know, how am I supposed to figure it out, right? I'm not in your brain. I'm not in your head. I am not you. The only person who can figure out what you want and need is yourself, okay? So when you are in a situation where in a healthy relationship partner, either that's a coworker, a boss, right? It could be a spouse, it could be a friend, doesn't matter what it is. But a healthy partner or relationship partner will want to give as well as receive from you in the relationship, okay? If you don't know what you want and need, it makes it very hard for them to give, okay? And it also means you're likely to be unaccustomed to receiving. So what ends up happening is that's very unsatisfying for someone with high emotional intelligence, right? So when I'm with a friend or a potential friend, for example, and they give me something, I want to reciprocate and give them something back. It's a give and take relationship. But if I'm never able to give them something because I have no idea what they want or need, it's very uncomfortable for me and I feel bad about it, right? Because it should be more balanced. So when you don't know what you want and need, there is a very high likelihood or risk, depending how you think about it, that the only people who will want to relate to you are those who just want to take from you, right? If you don't know what you want and need and never ask for anything because you don't know what to ask for, then you'll likely be comfortable in a situation where people who will take advantage of you, be in a very one-sided, lopsided relationship where you give to them, but they give nothing to you. That is more likely when you are unaware, or when one is unaware of one's wants or needs. So that's kind of like the strategic reason why. And most of the questions I asked and the examples I gave of what do I want right now, what do I need right now, they're more basic, right? I need to eat. I realize I haven't had anything to eat today, right? Like that's a very basic, more of a self-care oriented type of need, but that's the same skill set because if you're very good at sort of the basics of what you want and need, as you get into relationship with others, you can transfer the skill into what I want from you is is this. What I need from you is this. So for example, I have lots of different friends who I interact with. Most of them are not always local and they're all very busy. One of the things I do this fairly lately with all of them is, I would like to set up a time, a frequency of how often we interact, right? Would you be I'd be open to talking every week on the phone or every other week. That would be ideal for me. Or I'd be up for meeting for lunch, but it takes more time, right? I had to go drive and it takes a couple hours. So I'm up for either every 6 to 8 weeks, but probably not more often than that. Any less than that doesn't feel great for me because I feel disconnected from you. Would that work for you, right? So when you know what you want to need and what works for you, you can convey that information to others, and it gives them the way to connect and solve problems and sort of negotiate solutions to problems that would impact both of you. Okay? So that's kind of the reasoning behind that. Is it okay to feel like I need nothing right now? Or is that too zen? I would say in any one moment, if you don't need anything, that's probably okay. But if you ask yourself, 12 times in a day, 12 different hours, and every single time your answer is I need nothing, then I would most likely it's not too zen. Most likely it's lack of self-awareness. It would be my guess. People who are very, quote unquote zen, I get the impression they're quite aware of their needs and they just take care of them, right? Zen is not having no needs. Zen is at being at peace with where things are, but you can still be aware of what you need, right? So I would say any one instance is probably fine, but if that's your answer every single time or the majority of the time, that's probably more likely a sign of lower self-awareness. So for example, we've been talking now 2 hours and change. I've been sitting in my very uncomfortable chair. What I need to do is stand up, right? But I have a microphone in front of me that's assuming I'm in a seated position. So I can't stand up without ending the class, right? So once this class is over, you know what I need? I'm going to go stand up. That's what I'm going to do, right? I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that I would like to eat something, right? I had breakfast, and right now it's in the late afternoon. I had kind of a late breakfast, which was pretty big, so it was okay. But it's kind of getting to dinner time. I didn't really eat a lunch, so I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to want to eat something fairly soon. I'm staring at my water bottle. I'm realizing, shoot, I did not drink enough water in the last 4 hours, so I think I want more water. I am noticing that the air conditioning in the other room is a little chilly, so I want the temperature to be better. I'm going to go turn that down once this is over. So this is like 4 things in a 2-second interval of what I want and need. And they're quite micro in this particular instance, but that's where you start. Start with the super simple things, and that's okay, right? And then you build up. You start with things that you can control yourself, a little bit more environmentally oriented, for example, in my time and space. And then over time, you start taking that same skill set and applying it to relationships. And we'll talk about that in Module 4 around emotionally informed relating. So if you need, for example, I'll give you a great example. I have a friend who I'm very close to, but she is terrible at being on time for phone appointments. Lives in Los Angeles, late every single time. And so I told her, I love talking to you, but that having a 2 o'clock phone appointment where you show up at 2:55, an hour, 55 minutes late, that doesn't really work. I get kind of angry and resentful, to be honest, right? Again, being aware, right? Conveying that. Can we find a different way of communicating where I don't feel like my time is being wasted, but still works for you? And then we negotiate a solution. So we do now, and because she's quite overwhelmed on her schedule, she's unable to sort of consistently be on time for a variety of reasons, we have mutually agreed that we will text message each other, but do the audio recording text messages, so we can hear each other's voices, sort of like exchanging voicemails. And that works for us. That way I get them when I get them. I don't have to wait for her because I get angry about that. She doesn't have to feel like there's yet another commitment on her busy schedule, which was overwhelming for her at the time. And so we're experimenting with that in our friendship, and it seems to be working okay. I like talking on the phone more. It's more connecting for me. But I understand this is what's workable for her, and for me it is acceptable, right? So it meets my need, may not meet my wants, but it meets my need in terms of being efficient and productive with my time, and not my time not being wasted or feeling like I'm being disrespected. So that's an example of that. Okay, so isn't it frustrating if the answer to what I want or need is typically something I can't have or don't have yet. So it would be helpful to get more detail on this question from the person asking it. But I would say my guess, if I'm reading between the lines a little bit, is that if what you want and need is very macro, right, a very more goal aspirational, like what I need is to get into Harvard Business School, right? Or what I want is to get into Harvard Business School. I would suggest from a EQ standpoint, be more micro, right? Focus on the wants and needs that are simpler, everyday, but more mundane, right? What do you want for lunch? Start there. When it is more macro, and especially if everything you want and need are things that either are difficult to obtain or impossible to obtain, right? One question you might ask yourself is, why is it everything I want or need is nearly impossible, right? Why do I only want things that are only impossible? Like, what is that about, right? I don't know this person's context or situation, so I can't speculate. But the things I wonder about are, is there a perfectionism aspect to that? I want to be perfect, right? Is that the theme behind all my wants and needs, to be perfect? And that would be an interesting question to explore, for example. So, but most wants and needs, sometimes, if your wants and needs are difficult to attain but possible, right? Like people do actually obtain them, but not in your current situation, that might inform you that you might consider changing your situation. So, if your want professionally is to, I had a colleague of mine, an acquaintance of mine who wanted to learn how to do machine learning, because it's kind of like a popular thing amongst engineers here, sort of a trendier topic. And at the time, he had no experience in that. But he really wanted it, so he decided he'd go back to school for a year part-time. He did that, and then got worked for free for somebody, in that field for 3 or 4 months, and then got a full-time job offer from them doing machine learning type of data analysis of some kind, right? So sometimes the want and need can help inform us that our current situation is not working for us, and that maybe we want to consider doing something else, right? So there's value when the wants and needs are not being met. When it is possible to be met, but they aren't being met, that can be a signal to change the situation. If the needs are not being met and they're basically nearly impossible because nobody gets that need or want met, then you have to sort of question the premise behind how you think about wants and needs, right? You only go after things that are unattainable. So I have, for example, I have acquaintances, men and women who are in the single and dating. And they only want, men and women that are, quote unquote impossible, right? Like, why do you want someone who doesn't want you, right? What is the motivation behind that, right? And that's not something for this class. It's a great topic for therapy, to be honest. That's called the confrontation, where a therapist will ask somebody, a patient or a client, a question like that. That's sort of a very provocative question, or a thought-provoking question, rather, and it prompts somebody to think and how to understand their motivations and psyche a bit better. So those are just, a couple of thoughts around that question. So, and another question related is, can I say I want career progression now? Sure, you can definitely say that if that's something important to you. It might help to build a plan around that. Like if you feel that's really important to you, what does one mean by career progression? Does that mean get a promotion? Does that mean get a job with more responsibilities? Does it have to be in the same company, or can it be with a different company? And then you can start doing more of a project planning exercise. Again, not an EQ exercise, but like if I want to get to the next level, well, what skill sets are required? What skill sets do I lack? How am I going to get those skills and those experiences that would qualify me for the next level position? And then how do I go do that? And you'll be able to schedule, and I started doing that, right? So that's totally fine to do that. Again, if you only want things that are macro, multi-months, that's I would encourage you from a self-awareness and EQ standpoint to have more micro things, wants and needs that can be met in the next 6 minutes, rather than the next 6 years. And also to have things that are, take many, many years. I've had wants that were took me 10 years to get them, right? And I worked on it every single day, and I got it. 10 years later. Those are fine. It's helpful if there's a balance between the very long term and the short term. It's very healthy to have both, to be honest. Okay. Next is a question regarding the self-awareness rating system. Can you be on different levels for different categories, even pairs of feelings? Yeah, I think that's actually possible. I'm not anyone had asked that question before, but maybe you are super aware of sadness, grief, or anger, right? And super sensitive to that. You can pinpoint it, you can name it. You know the difference between irritation versus resentment. But maybe you're not really good at recognizing joy, right? Or serenity, or elation, or peace, or happiness, right? Or gratitude, right? It can be very possible to have less awareness in certain feeling categories. So a great exercise there is to ask how you're feeling, but try to restrict yourself to the categories that you're unaccustomed to recognizing. Because we all have feelings across the spectrum. We probably don't always recognize them, myself included. So for me, I'm much more in tune with my negative feelings than my positive ones. So one of the things I have to do is to work on that. And so, for example, on gratitude, one of the things I've done in the past is, all right, name 3 things I'm grateful for right this second, right? I'm grateful for the opportunity to teach all of you. I'm surrounded by like 5 screens. I have my phone on a stand. I have a secondary laptop. I got my main computer and a secondary screen. And I'm talking to people in 50 countries around the world. This was not possible 20 years ago, right? Like literally not possible. And so I'm amazed that I'm in a time and place where that is possible and I'm doing it, and that's amazing to me, right? I'm grateful I have a new water bottle. It's purple. I love it. Makes me drink more water, and I'm grateful for air conditioning because if not, this office room would be very hot and I'd be sweating right now. So, having prompted myself, I had to ask myself, what am I grateful for? And I have to force myself to name 3 things. So that's a way of taking that same idea of asking a simple question, but targeting into a specific feeling or feeling category. So in my case, in this example, I use gratitude, but it could be, what am I joyful for? Or what am I looking forward to? Right? Pick any of the categories and start asking yourself on a regular basis, questions around, open-ended questions around those feelings. And that's how you build better awareness in those areas. Okay, why is stress not in the feelings wheel? Excellent question. Stress, I'm going to argue, and I know this is a bit controversial, but I'm going to argue that stress is really all based in fear. That is my assertion. Not 100% true, but I think it's like 90% true. If you are not afraid, then you don't feel stress. So one of the things it's very interesting. So like at McKinsey, people who graduate from the Ivy League schools, it's kind of okay and socially acceptable to feel stressed, but it's kind of looked as kind of wimpy if you feel scared, right? But let me tell you, there are a lot of scared people at McKinsey. A lot. I was one of them. If you are not afraid, do you really feel stress, right? I'm feeling stressed because I'm going to run late to my meeting, okay? What is the feeling? It's fear. Right? I'm afraid I'm going to miss my meeting, right? That's why I have this response. I am afraid I won't get the promotion. I'm afraid no one's going to like my presentation. I am afraid that when I ask her out on a date, she's going to say no. I'm afraid my kids won't like me when they're adults, right? I am afraid that, I don't know. I'm afraid I'm going to do poorly in this class. I'm afraid I will never get a job offer. I'm afraid I'm going to get laid off. Right? I'm afraid that my peers will think less of me. Those are all elements of, basically fear. Right? So I would sit on that. That's my assertion that without fear, there probably is very little stress, right? Or certainly much less. Okay, let's see. Can I talk more about the 3rd level of the feelings wheel, including why I chose not to incorporate it into my self-awareness rating system? So I don't have a great reason for that. Sometimes I just try to teach the specific point I'm trying to illustrate rather than creating this integrated system. So yeah, I don't have a good answer. It didn't occur to me. I think self-awareness is more of the way I think about it is more of a general feel. But I think it would be appropriate if I were to do this class again in a different version. I might do self-awareness in the categories, rather than self-awareness in general. So, yeah. So that's my thought. Now I'm feeling a little awkward because I missed that point before in my pre-class planning. But there you go. Just being emotionally honest here. Okay. Do I have any books to recommend regarding self-reparenting? That's a very broad topic because reparenting can be in lots of different contexts. So I guess probably one book I like a lot is a book by P.M. Melody. It's called The Intimacy Factor. And so that is a book around teaching skills around having close emotional relationships, not something I had in the early parts of my life. So it was a useful introduction. It's a tad hard to read if you're not used to the kinds of topics in that genre. But I found P.M. Melody's works really excellent, in terms of reparenting. So any of her books I like quite a lot. But the intimacy factor is probably the most general one and the most broadly applicable. Other books are much more specific and specialized. And that's one, I would say. Another one is, I think it's by, I want to say David Rico. It's How to Be an Adult in Relationships. If you don't have time to read the book, just like Google a summary. There's a framework in there. I think it's like the 5 A's. How to be an adult in relationships. That's a useful one. So those are 2 that come to mind. I will have my colleagues on this call make a note for me to think about suggested reading materials, because I always get asked that a lot. And I'll try to put together a reading list so that when you get the recordings, you'll also have a reading list of books I like in this topic, and then which ones are useful for which subtopics. So I will commit to doing that, and I'll ask my team to make sure that's an action item that I fulfill on. Okay, so we'll take 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up for today. Let's see. I mentioned earlier that I lose my critical reasoning skills when a particularly strong emotion or situation takes place. The approach I suggested is to avoid the situation. However, do you think it is possible to teach yourself to feel something different under those circumstances, sort of to manipulate or to cheat your natural emotions? So yes and no. So I think, and this is where the self-awareness factor comes in. Can you alter your emotions, your instinctive emotions, to feel something different? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Right. So if, for example, when I give speeches now, when I do public speaking, I used to feel quite anxious and nervous. Right. I used to experience stress or fear that I wouldn't go well. I don't experience that at all. If I do, it's for 2 seconds. Right. And I know it's more than 2 seconds. But the second the first word comes out of my mouth, I'm on automatic. I'm very comfortable in front of a room, no matter what size audience. So yes, you can teach yourself how to respond emotionally in a different way. I'm trying to think of other examples. Maybe so more in romantic relationships. One of the things you'll see in the literature is that some people are very fearful of being emotionally close to others. Right, so it's kind of a fear of intimacy, if you will. P.M. Melody's book, The Intimacy Factor, also talks about that. That instinct is quite common for people where being in close relationships early in their life was very harmful, very negative or bad experience. Right, so that's fairly common, and one can reteach oneself to not have that reaction, particularly since you're an adult and you have different people that you're relating to where the negative experience isn't likely to happen again. So it's possible to teach them. So one is sort of quote unquote reprogramming your response is one avenue, and then the other is to sort of avoid the situation entirely. So it has to do with level of severity. This is why the emotional intensity scale is very useful. And it also has to do with your personal choices and your personal strategy for managing your emotions. And one way to manage emotions is to avoid the stimuli that provokes them, right? It is one thing if a situation is challenging, levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If the emotion is level 10, and particularly if it's a very harmful emotion, like someone's like for example, if, do you want to be around someone wielding a knife, swinging it, right, in the middle of the street, right? That evokes fear, evokes stress, intensity, all that kind of stuff. Yes, you could train yourself to be better and more calm when someone's trying to kill you, but do you really want to, right? So the U.S. Navy SEALs, for example, they train with live ammunition, right? So the average Navy SEAL fires 10,000 bullets, in a year, and they all fire real bullets. They don't use fake ones, and they train with real live ammunition. So when they actually have to go on a mission, they've done it like tens of thousands of times, right? Someone who's been in the SEALs 10 years has fired 100,000 times, right? The 100,000 and first time's not a big deal. Okay? So that's like an example of desensitization training, so very doable to reprogram your instinctive response. For the rest of us, I don't want to get better at getting used to someone shooting a gun at me, right? it's okay. I'm going to have like a level 9 or 10 reaction. I'm just going to avoid the entire situation. That's a personal choice. No judgment either way, people on the whole spectrum, but my personal choice is that's an area I do not want to get better at. So that's why it's useful to know what you want, right? Is once you're aware of how the certain situations impact you, you get to choose what works for you and what does not. All right, let's see. Last question. How does self-awareness help us in our professional careers? Great. This is a great way to kind of close out our Q&A. So when you are aware of yourself, there's a couple questions that are very useful that you can answer. Does this job work for me? All right. What do I want as my next step? Right? Am I happy? You'd be surprised how many of my students have in my opinion, not a very well-developed sense of of their own sense of happiness and joy. Right? I have a lot of, and I think this reflects sort of my life, frankly, is a lot of people who I call strivers, very ambitious, very driven, very determined, a lot of stress or fear-based actions. But self-awareness helps you figure out if you're getting what you want out of a situation. So, are you enjoying your career? Are you enjoying your particular job you have in this instance? Are you enjoying working in this specific company culture? Right? That's useful information. And a lot of people don't know, right? Or they feel very conflicted by it. Like, I'm in a job that I do not like, but it's quite prestigious and pays very well, right? It is better to be aware of the conflict, to feel both sets of feelings, right? A sense of security and stability from a very prestigious, high-paying job, but a sense of disappointment that they're not happy about it, right? As opposed to pretending one feeling doesn't exist, right? That's when you get into trouble, because then you're intentionally misinforming yourself and you can make poor choices. It is fine to, for example, take a job that you don't enjoy for the prestige and for the money, as long as you are fully aware of the choice you're making and the trade-offs involved. I'm totally okay with that. What I'm not okay with, as a general rule, is when someone is completely oblivious and not aware that, for example, they dislike a job and they're going to proceed anyway. So I'm a big advocate of well-informed decision-making, and I'm very much against poorly informed decision-making. So self-awareness is a way to better inform your career choices. That's why I feel it's very important. Also from a career standpoint, if you want to get into any position of leadership when you're managing other people, your foundation for all of your social skills comes from self-awareness. Your social skills will never exceed your level of self-awareness, or very rarely. Right? So if you want to manage others, if you want others to, if you want to fulfill leadership roles, if you want to work cross-functionally, if you want to have direct reports, there's a certain set of skills you need to manage those people and to lead others. If you lack self-awareness, that will be a very difficult challenge, for you to do. So if you want to be beyond the individual contributor, self-awareness matters a lot for more senior level positions. All right, so on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining in today. We will continue with Module 2 in our next session. I'm looking forward to continuing our class. Lots of great questions. I'm super excited because I can tell based on the questions that are being asked that I'm sort of provoking the thoughts and questions and thinking that I had intended. And so I'm looking forward to sharing parts 2, 3, and 4 in our subsequent sessions. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and thank you for calling in and joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you on our next session. Thanks. Have a great day.